got it? Yeah, we should be getting audio now. You getting that at all? Test, test, 1, 2, 1, 2, test, test. Yeah, here, let me go ahead and see about boosting it. Yeah, here, let me go ahead and... that would be why. Alright, you should be getting better audio now. It should be better now. Should be at least a little bit louder. Alright, yeah. Alright, cool. Alright, word. Thanks, Dustin. Have a good night, man.
So at 7:02, I will call the October 5th meeting of the Pembroke School Committee to order. Just remind the folks who are here and folks watching home, obviously watching home on PAC TV or Titan TV, the meeting is recorded and posted to our website generally 24 hours after the meeting or so, maybe 48 at the most. And it is done that mainly for our minister to get the information out to the community. We do have questions during the presentation. We have a long meeting agenda tonight. Ask you to email scinfo@pembroke12.org. Who will be here tonight, but if other people come, we'll remind them, if you want to speak, just sign in. I'll pull the sheet probably right when we get to the superintendent's report. We do MCAS probably first and then go to questions after that if that works for you. Okay? So with that, no adjustments to the agenda. We'll just have some things to add to the budget from a meeting with you folks. Communication that happened, bill schedule circulated today. And I will take a motion to approve the minutes of September 14th, 2021.
So moved. Second.
Motion by Susie, second by Sue. That makes it a little tougher. Any further discussion?
I won't do that again.
All those in favor? Opposed?
Aye.
Abstained? And Mr. Boyle joins David. I knew you were late, but we wanted to get the minutes.
No, I apologize, thank you.
No worries about it. Okay, second thing on the agenda, this has been circulated a few times. This, you have the marked up version with the edits that came through for the goals for the 2021-2022 school year. Just wanted to get these, we need to get these approved. I think we were agreeing on what we were doing and where we are and all that other stuff, but we need to make sure they get approved. We get them to the website and we have something to track. We'll continue to look at this as we go through process, budget, whatever it happens to be. So, are there any other comments or changes to the goals?
I had some, it's not anything like it, just where,
Go right ahead.
one was a typo, so that's okay, where we just was change it under the achievement goal to hands-on. I had a question, do we have any work, with students on, as far as within the social and emotional component, could we add in work kind of with the students directly on what other students in that realm of challenges might have to contend with?
The comment just came in and says they can't hear you.
They can't hear me?
No.
They can't hear me?
No.
Bring the mics closer.
Okay.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Jeez, never in my, well, very few
Same.
times in my life.
No one ever tells me to speak
Okay, I
loud.
apologize. Okay, good
Sorry.
now? I apologize for
Just with the social and emotional component, I'd love to add to that just any, because we're talking about educating parents and still working with staff, but it might be good to educate the peers of students that are dealing with this so that it can help them understand and may also help us inadvertently if there's any bullying situation, which I haven't heard of that, but at the same time, I just would love to have an educational component for students tied to different social and emotional challenges, especially right now.
Got it.
Is that okay?
It is. Can we do this? Why don't we do this? We have the goal is continued expansion of district-wide support for social and emotional learners, as well as a consistent focus on teacher wellness and self-care, leveraging CARES and ESSER monies where applicable. Can we do bullets below that of when we talk about continued expansion of district-wide support, that would be professional development workshops, opportunities for students to, trying to think, could we say work in group settings
Yeah,
to share experiences?
Yep, or just so they can it's educational, understand kind of what some of these social and emotional challenges are that people involve, because we're all in our own bubble, so it's really more just an educational component. I don't know if we even need to get into working groups, but more of just informative sessions, even if periodically with like Titan Time, or working into the health aspect,
So-
the health.
So why don't we do it this way, that we have it written because it's continued expansion of district-wide support, right? That's a support we're talking about. Can we do kind of the, for example, and then list things such as that and anything else? Everybody good with that on this side?
Yeah, well,
Thank
we
you.
could almost build it in to engage and educate. It says parents, but it could be parents and students. And that sort of
Exactly.
ties right into that section there. of
Yep,
sort of
so
where
there's
we're
not
headed.
really a lot of modification. I was trying to keep it simple. That's hard for me,
Fair
you
enough.
guys all know that, but also same tied to this with the EAD survey, I just asked myself, what do we tell the students? Like when we're working with them, I know we're giving feedback to the staff on where we are on our progress, but do we ever actually give that type of feedback back to maybe the class as a whole or the grade level as a whole? So that sometimes folks are competitive and they may want to say, you know what, let's all work together. Let's try to help our peers and maybe we'll move the ball forward a little better too. I don't know.
That's a great
Is that
question.
something that happens?
That's a great point. Do we share the survey results?
With students in particular, no. Like the teachers talk about it at grade level meetings or at content meetings at the secondary level, but we don't necessarily share the results with students.
Yeah, because I think the data is probably more complicated
Yeah.
than some grade levels, but at the same time, if there's some way we could, I think it might help motivationally or help them even when they're working with their peers to, I don't know. I just was thinking about that, like, you know, if they have a stake in the game kind of a thing.
Yeah, I'm not
But there
sure
might
if
be
you say to a group of fourth graders, you know, across the
True.
district, educational
Yeah.
vocabulary is down. I don't know if that'll be a driver for them, but it may have a different, there might be an easier way to kind of use that at the secondary level with students, whether it's through.
Yep.
24/7
And I
social
absolutely
skills.
trust your judgment on
Yeah.
what grade level it should begin. I just was wondering, because I'm like, I don't know.
I think in the guidance seminars, that's a perfect opportunity for them to be sharing information with groups of students about outcomes and testing and you know, how the tests differ this year from other years and why.
Is I don't mean to disrespect my generation, but I think students of these generations are a little more in tune with things and a little more worldly than maybe my generation was back in the day. And so I think they might become real stakeholders at a certain level. So thank you for tolerating me, and that's all I had.
Okay, so do we need to make a wording change to this? Because right now it says to present professional development needs for staff as well as budget priorities and resource allocation for upcoming budget cycles. So this is just focusing on what we're doing.
We
So-
can add
so
share
what-
relevant results with students.
Okay, because I was going to ask the question, is that a goal or an action item? Do we need to include it here or not? I'm not saying,
Yeah,
which,
that's a good point. That's a good point.
right, because can we just know that we're going to do it, but not include it in the goal? Okay.
Guys.
Any other comments? Okay, so with that, is there a motion to approve the school committee goals for 2021, 2022 as amended?
Seconded.
Motion by David, second by Susie. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstained, it is unanimous.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Okay, so superintendent's report, MCAS data.
So as we talked about this before, this is one of the first versions of our updates on interrupted learning. Again, the MCAS data was released publicly last week. Parent reports will be going out towards the end of this week. Mary Beth's going to take you through some of the data, talk a little bit about where we were at, or thinking we were at in June versus where we're at now. And you'll hear her stress several times that this is a diagnostic test. It isn't the same as it was in 2019 or 2018. It's really, students sat for half the amount of time. The test itself looked drastically different than it had in years past for kids. Some kids tested at home in grades 3 through 8, so it's important to know that we're not necessarily, it's not apples to apples with previous years.
So I just wanted to let you know that the first 3 slides that you're going to see are very similar to the ones that I presented to you. Reiterate the goals that we had identified in June in regards to learning loss or interrupted learning during the pandemic. And I'm going to focus heavily tonight on the academic pieces that that our teachers are taking, are experiencing with professional development and diagnostic testing. But I just want to preface the entire presentation by saying the first thing that our teachers will do is obviously they know that students' social emotional well-being is the priority. So no student is going to learn more, learn faster, or learn deeper unless they feel safe and secure. So my presentation isn't necessarily focused on those strategies, but I just wanted to make a note that that's certainly something that our teachers are well aware of and keeping track of and staying in close touch with our support professionals and our building administrators. So it's a very important part of it. As I mentioned in June, learning acceleration versus learning remediation has to do with staying on grade level standards and finding opportunities in the standards to go back to previous learning and to integrate it at that time, instead of stopping learning completely, going back, for example, if you're in grade 4 and just teaching grade 3. So that the research recommends that the best thing to do is to stay on track for a number of reasons. Self-esteem of students, the various developmental needs of students. Also, some students don't need to necessarily go back. So it's a very precise and, I would say, time-consuming process for teachers to sort of figure that out. And it's something that they do every year. The pandemic has just given us sort of a wider opportunities, more opportunities for us to be figuring out where kids are and how to help them to move forward. The different colors just show you where we were, where we are. So as you know, in the summer, we had immediate interventions for our high-needs students. We had our traditional extended summer or extended school year. We had a summer school program for our high school students, and we had a literacy program aimed at some of our students who are identified by our teachers as needing some support for reading. That was 139 students were invited to that, and about 75 to 80% of them completed it. That was a good thing. So right now we're in the green. We're at the teacher point where the teachers are gathering information. They have had one session with our professional development organization or provider called Mcas and Associates. That's a group of former superintendents who go out to districts and share best practices and research. And in August, what they did was they worked in small groups by grade level spans with teachers to talk about the pros of acceleration versus remediation and how to start gathering that formative data from students as quickly as possible so that we can begin to see where the focus should be in classrooms. That was, for some of our more veteran teachers, a lot of it was a refresher. For some of our newer teachers, it was a very helpful, sort of some helpful strategies for them to consider. That teacher training will continue in November. In November, they'll be again working in grade level teams or in departments. And the November meeting will be a much more work group-oriented type of meeting where the teachers will be they'll have data at their fingertips at that point. They'll have their diagnostic data from iReady, from Lexia, from some of the other programs that we use out the district to place students and to figure out where students are in terms of grade level. They'll have MCAS data, and they'll also have some internal benchmark data. So they'll have a lot of information at their disposal at that point to be able to really see what trends need to be, what trends they're seeing and where they should focus again their energies and where in their curriculum would be good spots for them to start to weave in previous concepts if they feel that those need to be revisited. One thing to note is that our Lexia program and our iReady program, which are our K-6 programs, are very good at doing that already. They're adaptive programs. So if you're moving at a pace and all of a sudden, just going to use multiplication, and you're having trouble with multiplication, they'll bring you back to a previous lesson and have you review that lesson. And the teacher can see on those lessons where a student might be struggling as well. So we do have a number of tools at our disposal. So this work is already started, but it will be a little bit, I think, for teachers, be comforting for them and our 3 elementary schools to come together and share what they're seeing across the district as we start to formulate a district plan and think about what kind of interventions we want to be offering students. So one of those data points is MCAS test results from the spring, and I just want to caution people, it is one data point, and it's a very different data point than we've seen in the past. Again, as Erin said, the test for grades 3 to 8 was half of the traditional time that the test, they sat for one session versus 2, and the standards on the different, they were called forms, the standards on the different forms were different. And again, some of our students actually tested at home as well. There's no shock that students across the state did a little did a little worse than they've done in the past. That was to be expected. And one of the reasons why I think this test is mostly useful to teachers and to families for identifying their own child's particular strengths and weaknesses at this point. But again, it's really the test as an aggregate indicator of overall student performance is a little bit weak if you're trying to compare it with other districts or compare it with other years, because every district was in a different type of learning environment last year. There were all kinds of different variables going on throughout the year, and it's not really a good comparison point, but it is a wealth of data for us because you can drill down in this test pretty deep and see the item analysis. You can see it by school, by teacher, by the district. You can see it in a lot of different ways. So the data is available for us to start to address that.
Can I ask a question on that, though?
Sure.
The year-over-year stuff is kind of, in my mind, a little pointless because, right, it's different kids, different cohorts. Is there additional, I know that, how much are you looking at student progress? I know they don't take the same exams every year, but if you have a data point for a child a year ago, 2 years ago, actually, it would have been 2 years ago.
That's the problem. So now we're going back 2 years to the previous, or last time they took one of these tests.
But if you're not
Yeah.
looking at, I'm not saying, right, because obviously the standards are different because they're in different grade levels, but if you look at where they fell in
Yep.
relation on the score, are you looking at that, and is that provide any value?
Yeah, we're definitely going to be looking at that, and we always are looking at, what percentage of students are in each of those categories, and then for the individual student, was there a dramatic drop, for example, last year? Now, we know that there could be multiple factors for a dramatic drop in the past year, so yes, we definitely do it, but we do it more on an individual basis, Mike, than.
Got it, yeah, which is what I was expecting.
Yeah. So the teachers, the classroom teacher has access to the students' previous year's MCAS results and then to their MCAS results from this year. So, but again, it's a little tricky because, for example, the fifth graders, they took this test as third graders. So and now they're sixth graders. So it's
Yeah,
confusing.
no, I understand, I'm just trying to
Yeah.
see if you're picking up trending, because is it an anomaly, is it just because of what's happened, or what are we
Right.
seeing?
But again, it's half the test too, so we can pick some of that up, but it's not the same. as
Yep, well, I get that,
previous years.
okay, thanks.
This just, I thought might be interesting too, to see how many students took the test here at school and how many students opted to take it remotely. About the same amount, 3 to 8. That option was not available for the high school tests, but it was an option for students in grades 3 through 8. I aggregated the results the way the state does, instead of breaking it out by each school, because I'm not sure that's so valuable at this point in time. The teachers have that information, and the building administrators also have that information. But when we look at these results, what we try to do in a traditional school year is we look at the green and the blue lines, right? So how many of our students are meeting or exceeding expectations? And you can see the district versus the state in this particular slide for ELA. And if you compare our meeting and exceeding expectations was 54% of the district versus the state at 46%. Again, I'm not putting a ton of value into that, except for if you go back and look at our previous year that we took it, you can see in 2019 and 2018, when the test was brand new in 2018, but in 2019, our ELA scores were meeting and exceeding expectations were 60% of our students, and then the state was at 52. So, again, we're ahead of the state, which is always want to be, but just a little bit of a data point for what it's worth. That's how we used to look at it. Again, I don't know that it's so valuable right now. In ELA, the numbers were better than in math. Math across the state, you probably saw some of the reports on TV, which probably made you think that the sky was falling, but actually, again, we were able to really hold our own for grades 3 through 8. 61% of our students met or exceeded expectations in 2019. And in 2021, it was 48. Again, much better than the state.
Mary Beth, just a quick question, and I know we're talking over schools, but do we have a look at kind of the competitive set at South Shore? And I know you said
Yeah.
you can run it and break it down.
We do. So they're called DART schools, district-alike schools.
Yeah.
We look at specifically for a lot of our comparison points and decision-making and programmatic sort of comparisons.
Yeah.
They're not releasing that this year because they don't feel so this year they're holding, for lack of a better phrase, they're holding districts harmless. They're not being held accountable for any of this data because they don't feel that it's reflective necessarily of a full school year or how students traditionally perform. So they didn't release that. We'll go out and do that on our own just for some sort of edification of our, just to see ourselves. But they haven't released it in the ways that they've done it before. So there's generally a report for us that we can see. The state identifies our district-alike schools. And it's different sometimes for each of our elementary schools and sometimes for our middle school and high school. They vary all over the place. So we'll go back to our old lists and go through, this material was just sort of released a week ago, but we'll go back and start looking at other districts too and try to figure out, how did they do? But again, it's a little bit dangerous because some schools never went back full-time until the spring. Some schools did, it's just a real mix of data, and it's interesting, but I don't know that it's much more than interesting at this point.
Thank you.
And then again, that's the mathematics.
Yeah, to me, I think internally, that's what I would take more stock in than anything external.
Absolutely.
And we dipped, but as you were saying, it's a different test, so
Yeah, it is.
I think that concerns me more, because then it says, well, if it was the full test, do we dip even more, right? So we really don't know.
We don't really know, except for there were some things tested on, so depending, there were some things tested on Form A that weren't tested on Form B that kids scored well on. And there were some things on Form B that students didn't do well on necessarily, but kids in Form A did. So it just got a little messy, honestly. So again, the best use of this data is really for individual students and for teachers to start to match instructional styles and instructional content to what the students in front of them are able to do or need to refocus on. The 5 and 8 tests for science were again a little bit lower than we'd like to see, but certainly given the year that we had last year, not a shock. And once again, one session, not two. So that's sort of a high-level summary of our grades 3 to 8. We can get down into more detail if you want an achievement report at a later date with some more information. But that 3 to 8 data, in my mind, is diagnostic data best used by teachers in classrooms and with parents to make decisions about where students need to focus this year and where we want to put our interventions, where we need to spend our resources in terms of supporting students.
So I do have a question. Well, we're going to talk about some of the resources that are going to get deployed when Erin does the ESSER,
Right.
the ESSER update. But I do have a question. We're 11 months away from 11 and a half months away from getting the next set of MCAS scores. What are we going to be able to look at to judge progress through the year? And we can't over-assess because it's taking away time from the school day, but how do we know that what we decided to use for this year, what we decided in April that we were going to do for this year and what we're going to do when we get the presentation tonight, how are we going to know if that's helping and if we need to course correct? Just what's the next major thing that we can get at this level, at our level, so we know what's going on?
Well, I would say at this point, what we're working on is integrating this data with the data that we have from the students sitting in front of us right now. So a student right now completing their iReady diagnostic is in a whole different place than they were in last June when they were finishing their iReady, sort of summative performance report. So we're able to see right then, those online platforms give us grade level standards, and we were able to look at those grade level standards, which are what the MCAS is aligned to. So that's how we figured it out on that end. I'm not sure if I'm answering your
So
question.
let me ask it a little bit more specific, because I don't think, I know I didn't ask it right or well. So we get 2 more updates.
Yes.
How do we know, 2 more updates, then we're going to have budget discussions
Yes.
between February and March on the learning aspect of our budget. What will we see in December and February to say, you know what, we were here, we're now here?
So our benchmark assessments that have been created locally by our teachers here, they'll be able to look at data from this year and compare it to previous years, and to be able to have a sense of what do we need to do next? Are we missing something? I do think that one of the things that Erin's going to present in the budget, I do believe that the tutoring model that we want to implement is really one of the most powerful ways to get at this. Small group instruction and one-on-one instruction is really the way that you work with students to catch up, for lack of a better term,
Yep.
or to accelerate. Right?
Which was the
That's
whole point of the
best.
summer program, right, that you talked about the 80 kids completing. Because what would be interesting to me on top of all of it is to look at that cohort of the students who participated, and where are they, at the different points.
Yep.
Because we're going to get into a situation when we look at the ESSER money, which is obviously very significant. Not all of it can be used in the classroom. Some of it has to be used for other things.
Sure.
But when we look at it and we deploy those resources, is it worth doing another summer model program again next year, right? What are those types of decisions that we need to make?
Right.
Right, and they take the diagnostic a couple of times over the course of the year, so we have
Yeah.
data for now, and we'll have data, and I think they take it again in
There's
December and
three,
January.
there are really
so-
3 data points for the diagnostics that are, platforms, but we also have 3 benchmarks that we can take a look at as well. And I think it's the combination of those things that teachers use to identify students who may need more. I personally believe that we will need to do some type of summer school this year. I think that this interrupted learning is going to have peaks and valleys. It's going to pop
Sure.
and come back, and I think for last year, unfortunately, I think people were really exhausted. It was a really long
Which we
year
know.
for students, and it was a really long year for families and for teachers. And even though we were talking about trying to put something together, we did not have a lot of appetite from students or families for that kind of an intervention. But I think next year could be very different.
Could be different, yeah.
Yes.
I'm looking at it, we want to make sure we're doing right by the students, by the way the
Absolutely.
resources are deployed. And there's a second piece is, there are people watching when you're given a significant sum of money, that we're spending it in the right way and we're getting results for it. I think that's part of the whole goal-setting process that we just talked about.
When Erin, does her presentation, you will see that the tutoring model is relatively expensive, but I think that's where.
It's the right use of funds.
I think that's a really good use of those funds for small groups and individual work.
Got it.
And just to back it up, just so that I understand, because I'm the newbie here, and I just want to make sure I get it. So the benchmarks you're talking about, we have internally, that's what you're talking about, and so everybody has sort of the same.
Correct. So we have in math and ELA grades 3 through 8, actually in science as well, there are benchmark assessments at each grade level. There are 3 that the district supports and that teachers give, and they revise them generally in the summer. They look at the data from those benchmarks over the summer, and they try to make adjustments. But they're very much based on the standards, which are linked to the MCAS. It's all sort of linked together.
Mhm.
So many of the questions on those assessments are MCAS-like.
Okay, and then will we have that data available to us when we are about to talk about the?
Yes, we'll have it, we could have some of it in some form. Probably at least 2 pieces of that data will be available to us, and it would be definitely aggregate data
Okay.
in terms of what teachers are seeing, for sure. We don't generally use individual teacher results or anything like that at this level, but we can say, for example, the grade 4 teachers are noticing, well, Erin just said something that's kind of been popping up, students lack some academic vocabulary. They're not sure what some of these words mean. What does it mean? And that's typical anyways, but there are just a few things that people are starting to notice as a trend that, so then we're going to work on that. We're going to make sure that we work on that moving into a testing period in the spring, for sure.
Okay, and I know this is just wondering, so have you always done these benchmarks in addition to?
Yes,
to the-
yes.
So you already have the data to compare from previously,
Yes.
since we can't use?
Yeah, but again, you do have, the comparisons, you have to be a little bit careful, it's different kids, it's
Right,
different,
of
you know,
course.
it's, you know, but
Yeah.
you can draw some limited
Okay.
conclusions from that data. And it helps instruction to be able to say, well, the students in front of me are struggling with this year, but they didn't seem to struggle with it that year. Am I presenting it in a way that's different? Is there a different way for me to present it? Is it a particular group? Did they miss something the year before? Maybe I need to chat with the teachers from the year before and see what happened. You know, that's what those tests are able to give you.
And those benchmarks happened last year in spite of being
They happened, but they happened in a very different form.
Different way,
Yeah,
yeah.
the last thing people really wanted to be doing was assessing kids more when they were here.
Yeah.
So they were adapted. They were not given in the way that they've been given in the past.
Beth, when you hit on this, can you just spend an extra minute or two talking about MCAS for graduation requirements, what's been waived for which classes, just so people are clear, and I see you have the John and Abigail Adams. Can you go through all that just to remind people?
Yep, that's what I'm going to do right now. So the MCAS at the high school, now this is a whole different situation at the high school. So at the high school, you take your MCAS as a competency determination. You have to pass the test in biology in grade 9, math, and ELA. You have many opportunities to do that, however. The state allows you to retest until you pass the test. So there are multiple opportunities to do that. Last year, for the class of 2021, the state waived the tests in science and some of the retests for students because of the pandemic. So there were some waivers that were given for the class of 2021. For the class of 2022, they also waived the MCAS in ELA and math and the science determination. So what they were able to do, students were able to, the science one's tricky because they took it as 9th graders, but in all, they were able to give waivers and say that if you passed the course, if you passed the local course, then you don't need to retake that test. You don't have to take that test. This year's 10th graders don't have that waiver opportunity. They took their biology test last year, and they'll take their 10th grade tests this year. And last year's 10th graders also are in the pipeline to have the 3 tests as the indicators for MCAS. I don't know if they'll come out and make some adjustments. I don't think they will, because there will be opportunities for retesting through grade 10, in grade 11 and grade 12, so that students can reach that achievement level. So they'll be doing that. The students in grade 9, like I said, they took what's called the legacy exam. That exam in biology has not been updated to be the next generation type of MCAS. It's an older format that we've had for many, many years. The students in grade 10 participated in English language arts and math next generation exams. Remember, next generation exams are online. They're very different. They're measurements of college and career readiness, as opposed to did you learn something in this, like a summative assessment of a course, which is much more what the legacy test was about. However, the state did allow students in grade 11 to opt in to take one of the legacy exams if they wanted to, because you need to take 3 MCAS exams to qualify for a John and Abigail Adams scholarship. The John and Abigail Adams scholarships provide qualifying students with 8 semesters of tuition at state schools. So we had 27 students who decided to take the test voluntarily to see that if they would qualify. They already had taken the 9th grade science MCAS before. Did they take that before the pandemic? Yes, before the pandemic. I get them all mixed up. There's so many different gyrations. Is that?
Yeah, I just want to make
okay.
sure people knew
Yep.
what they
And
needed to
to
follow.
become a John and Abigail Adams scholar, you have to score in the advanced category in one of the 3 tests, proficient in the 2 other categories, and you also have to have a combined score that's in the top 25% in the district. So that's the way they do it. Those letters will be coming, they said mid-October. We recently received the MCAS parent information, so we'll be pushing that out by the end of the week to send home to families too. That's more on it, Mike, that I
Yep.
haven't included, but I think I just mentioned all those things. This is just quick for you, just because we're going to go through. Biology is going to look a little different than the math and ELA. There's just different criteria for scoring, a whole different scoring rubric and grid, so they're a little bit different. Grade 10, MCAS, ELA. Again, you want to be looking at the green and blue bars. Those are the kids that scored meeting or exceeding expectations. And in comparison, we have the 2019 year and the 2021 year. We actually scored better this year on the 10th grade test than we did in 2019. In 2019, 72% of our students met or exceeded expectations. This year, 73% of our students met or exceeded expectations. So that was,
I actually should have asked.
doesn't show a whole lot of, that's certainly a nice piece to this story.
I should have asked this question on the elementary, sorry. Is this all students, or does this include the special education students?
All students.
All students, okay.
All students. In the past, Mike, when we've done achievement reports, we've broken it out by different populations.
Right, yeah,
So you can see all students versus students with high needs, students
If it
with
was a
special ed.
graduation requirement, I probably would have wanted to see the breakdown just to see where we are, right? Because I know they make combinations and the such, but, okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure I understood. Thank you.
Yep. The math, again, in 2019, the meeting and exceeding expectations was at 64%, and in 2021 at 67%. So again, better than the state. Students seem to be holding their own in regards to, for the competency determination at the high school. Students seem to, obviously, there's a different stake with these tests, right? Students come into them, they take them very, very seriously. They know that it's important, and that their graduation is dependent on that. And then in biology, our ninth graders, you can see this is a little bit different. This is the old scoring, advanced, proficient, needs improvement, or warning of failing. But again, very, very strong in 2021. 53% are meeting expectations, 26% exceeding, which is a little lower than before. But overall, given the challenges that our students faced during this time, absolutely, I think, a credit to those students and to the teachers. I think they really focused on the big standards and really tried hard to keep that in the forefront of the work last year. So what do we do with all this? How do we make this something that's actionable and something that we can use to help our students so that they are ready for college and career when they're exiting our district? I mean, that's always our goal, is to make sure that they have options and that they're prepared, and that they will be successful based on their time with us. We know that we're having an increase in social emotional learning supports, and that's important to recognize, right? We have students that are coming back to school, some of them for the first time since 2020, 2019. They are, what teachers are talking about right now is, this data is obviously specific to some of their standards, but teachers are noticing kids are really tired. This is the sort of some of the things that were a little bit novelistic about last year, the hybrid days, the days home, the remote day, the variation in the schedule, the constantly changing schedule. This is the routine again. It's 5 days, and it's hard for some of our students. It's developing that perseverance and that grit again is something that teachers are noticing, and it's something that everybody's aware of, and we know it will take a little bit of time, but that will certainly come together. We are in the process, and we have data now from, as I said before, we have the MCAS data, we have diagnostic data from some of our platforms that we use. We have teacher observation. Teachers have started their formative assessments of students. So now we have to figure out how do we identify the students, which we will be able to do pretty easily, and then go out and get some talented and excited tutors to come in and work with our students on some of these skills and content areas that we know they might need support in. We are very fortunate to have that Titan time block here in Pembroke, which means that we can utilize people at the same time every day, and students won't be pulled from a content area in order to receive extra support, and that is really important. So I'm excited that we'll be able to work that into the school day. We also feel very strongly that we'd like this intervention to primarily occur during the school day, so that it is equitable and so that most students, so that all students that need it are getting it, and that it's not a burden to families in terms of transportation or in terms of competing with other interests that a student might have, which are equally important to students' self-esteem at times. And so we really want it to happen during the school day. We've been successful with that model at different times in our history. We used that model with our Title I services before, and we've used that model with Mcas remediation, I don't even know if you call it remediation, Mcas extra help for students at the high school in the past as well. So we know that it's a model that works, and we just have to expand it a little bit.
With that, why don't we go to Aaron, who's going to give the update on the budget piece, the ESSER funds. Then we're actually going to bounce to E, which is kind of ties all together because it's all related to COVID. If you want to speak, what I'd ask you to do is sign in soon, because as soon as Aaron's done with B, we talked about the updated on the budget impacts, I'm going to grab the sign-in sheet. We'll get to the update on DESI requirements for masking waiver guidance, and then we'll get to questions and then comments. So if you like to speak on the agenda, just do me a favor, sign in the next few minutes, and then I'll come up and grab that. And Aaron, I wanted to ask before no questions came through email, right? Was that, okay. Yeah, if anybody has questions on, I know there's a lot of information being communicated, scinfo@pembrokek12.org, I don't even know what I'm talking. But if you have a question, please shoot an email and we'll happily get to it during the session. So, you ready?
Yes. So I'm going to give it just a little bit, get my microphone in the right spot, of an update of the ESSER funding. So I just want to remind everybody that when we're talking about ESSER funding, as a committee, we all have been talking about it as a multi-year strategy, regardless of the year that the funds come in. So we could access all of this money in 1 year. We could spread it out over 3 years. But we've really taken the approach of, I think, fiscally looking at it and strategically planning for it so that we're making the most impact in the time frame for students and for staff. So let's see, maybe it'll click.
Okay. I don't know if I
You're
got-
good?
I don't know if I have a better angle on the.
It sometimes just takes a minute for some reason. I had the same problem when I started.
I'm like slide 5 by the time I'm done clicking.
There's only 7 slides.
Yeah.
It's in
Quick
there.
presentation.
Yeah,
Mary
exactly.
Beth's closer, she can click.
Yeah, sometimes if you're closer on the.
So while we're getting it to click forward, I'll remind you that we sent out a stakeholder survey to the community for feedback on what specifically folks were interested in us using the ESSER 3 funds for. So that is one of the buckets of money that the district is eligible for. That funding source in particular goes through September of 2024. But we did reach out to the community. Mary Beth, you can just move it forward manually, it's fine. There's only 7 slides. There you go. We did reach out to the community. We got 275 responses there. The bulk of the responses, as you can imagine, came from caregivers or families in the community. We did get some feedback from staff as well as a little bit of student feedback and some from just the community at large. One of the main questions of the survey was just asking what folks felt the priorities for the funding would be. I want to point out, obviously, academic support and intervention was very high on the list. Mental health services and student supports, very high on the list. multi-tiered intervention system, which you just heard Mary Beth talking a little bit about, social emotional learning and supports, and some facility upgrades in educational technology were all amongst the highest priorities from the community as well as caregivers. So kind of narrowing that down a little bit, we asked a follow-up question just to survey respondents on, what should the immediate focus be? And as you can imagine, and just coming off of some of that MCAS information, the immediate focus was felt to be support to help students make up for the progress for lost skills. I think Mary Beth did a great job about explaining you don't necessarily make up for the lost time, but how we're going to get students to kind of circle through the skills that we need them to know moving forward without necessarily going back and reteaching all of last year. So what we're going to talk about now is just kind of the funding that's available, how we thought about it both as a budget subcommittee, how we've talked about it as a full committee, and what that means for each year moving forward for the next 3 years. So just a quick reminder, there are a couple of different ESSER funds, ESSER 1, ESSER 2, and ESSER 3. Very unique names they have. Very creative. So this is the elementary and secondary schools emergency relief fund is what the ESSER stands for. So the ESSER 1 is for $86,000. We applied for that funding in the middle of last year. We did not use it last year. We had, obviously some budget flexibility with some of the CARES funding, so we're able to reserve all of those funds for future years. The same with ESSER 2. I'll talk a little bit more about some of the placeholders we had for ESSER 2. ESSER 3 is the larger grant, so that grant specifies that you must get community feedback, but we took the ESSER 3 community feedback and applied it to all of the grant funds as if it were one group of money for $1.6 million. That seems to be the best way to think about it.
Let me jump in on that.
Yep.
So the survey we sent out, the town's going to send out a similar survey. They have to do it because they qualify also for ESSER 3 funds. And there'll be, so if you see another survey, it's not from us, it's from the town, it's for their monies, and there's all sorts of.
Yep, so the town monies are called ARPA funds, the American Recovery Plan Act. Those funds on the town side are earmarked in a way that it's more operational and infrastructure type projects, but there is an allocation availability for the schools within those town funds as well. I also want to point out the Plymouth CARES funds that are there. That is a lot of where our budget flexibility from last year came from. We did submit for quite a bit of reimbursement through Plymouth County. There's additional funds available right now through December 31st as that were part of that original allocation from last year. So we'll continue to access those to create some additional flexibility within this current fiscal year. So year one this school year. In thinking about the use of the money and the timeline in which the money expires. So obviously it makes the most sense to use the money that expires first. So ESSER 1 expires in September of next year. So we took a look at the ESSER 1 funds, and then there are two additional grant allocations, the ARP for IDEA and ARP for IDEA Early Childhood. Those are two grants specifically designed for addressing interrupted learning with our special education population. So looking at that as kind of one group of money, what is the best impact that we can make in this school year in particular? And I think you could see from some of the data that Mary Beth shared, as well as just the conversation, that we really believe that the best intervention is the tutoring model, whether it's small group or individual instruction. So what we're proposing for this year is a tutoring model at the elementary level for math and ELA, the same at the middle school, and then at the high school adding a science piece to it as well. What you see there is the cost associated with hiring outside providers to come in and tutor students during that tightened time block. I know that there's quite a workforce shortage out there, but there is a pool of retired teachers as well that are looking to do this type of work. So I think on Mary Beth's slide, she put a timeline of hiring probably mid-October or so. Our teachers have already started to identify students that would benefit from this model. So the intention is to have this model really up and running towards the end of October, beginning of November. One of the other really important pieces to this is the social emotional health and wellness of our students. Again, Mary Beth, as she said, stated that, students are not going to remediate, accelerate, any of that if they don't feel safe in school. So what we're also looking to do for this school year is to increase by 0.5 social worker. So that would be at the middle school, so that every one of our buildings has a full-time social worker at them. Right now, you'll remember that the model is 1 social worker at Hobbamuck, 1 at Bryantville, 1 at North, 2 at the high school, and a half-time social worker at PCMS. So this would increase that social worker to 1.0. We will come back to you, I think, in November. I think, Mike, you had asked to share about a little bit about what does the work day of the social worker look like now. We talked in the past about whether it was time with teachers, time with students, time with parents. I'm happy to update the committee on if at all that has shifted with the COVID pandemic, or whether the work is similar in nature.
Now, Aaron, hiring this person with ESSER money, is this, I guess for lack of a better
Yep.
word, a temp?
So, I should have said that up front. Thank you for the lead-in. Generally, it is a bad idea to hire staff with one-time funds, and these are all considered to be one-time funds. I think as a district, we have year over year increased our allocation associated with social emotional wellness with students. You will remember last year, our level 1 budget priority was actually a 1.0 social worker, but we only added 0.5. So this is a little foreshadowing that I would anticipate as we get into the budget discussion for next year, that we would be looking to keep this position in the district. One of the other types of supports that we're noticing, both just with our own eyes on students as well as teacher feedback of students, is some behaviors that could be resulting from the pandemic. We've talked a lot at the committee level about what school readiness looks like for students in the past. That has not changed. So what we're looking to do in addition is to increase our BCBA. So BCBA stands for Board Certified Behavior Analyst. We consult with Pilgrim Area Collaborative for those services. Right now, we'd like to increase those service hours in the district. So what that means is a certified BCBA comes in, observes in a classroom, gives strategies, helps on behavior plans, works directly with the teacher, and in some cases with the student for immediate addressing of a specific issue. Another desire is to contract with PAC again for 2 registered behavior technicians. So these are staff, again, not permanent additions to our budget, a consult, that come in and work specifically with a student on a specific behavior for a finite period of time. So they would be kind of working throughout the district. They may spend 2 weeks here at North with a kindergartner and then a month at Bryantville with a first grader, but moving throughout the district. There is, some global behaviors that we see that the BCBA would consult on, and there's some really student-specific instances that we could use some additional support with an RBT. As Mary Beth also talked about in her presentation, we've done an extensive amount of professional development with Rebus for the teachers for this year. We also have a similar professional development program in place for our education support professionals with that same agency. We did get some feedback from CPAC at their meeting, I think it was last week, Jess, that they're looking for some additional parent professional development just on how to help students kind of recover from COVID, or what they can do at home as far as strategies. So we'd like to put some additional money towards professional development. And again, there's some curricular materials that we'd be looking at as well. As far as the Plymouth County CARES money, again, with there being money available this year through December, we would look to access that the same way we did last year for items that were specific to COVID-19 and a pandemic. So as far as maintenance, we did change our maintenance schedule for our filters for univents and HVACs from quarterly to monthly, so continuing to purchase additional HVAC and univent filters, cleaning supplies, PPE, again, additional masks. The nursing staff requires specific PPE for our test and stay program, so having an ample supply of that. We have obviously needed to ramp up our tech infrastructure in the past 12 to 18 months based off of the number of devices that we've added to the network. That's required obviously some additional licenses, as well as you can imagine there's been some broken iPad screens or missing Chromebook adapters, so using the CARES funds for those pieces where we can. You'll see there that only outlines about $150,000 of CARES funds. There's about $250,000 available to us, so we'll continue to work on the one-time items to come out of that funding. Year two, we're looking at the Sr2 funds. So the Sr2 funds go through September of 2023. Anybody that was participating during the budget cycle last year will remember that we used $138,000 of Sr2 funds to offset our budget gap from last year. We are obviously keeping a very close eye on that number. With the flexibility with the CARES funding, I don't anticipate needing to use as much, or if any, of the Sr2 money to balance the FY22 budget, which gives us some additional opportunities for a summer program like we talked a little bit about earlier with the MCAS results, as well as flexibility to continue pieces of that tutoring model into the next school year. I don't expect it to be as robust as we're planning for this fall, but I do think there'll still be some, whether it's early literacy interventions or additional MCAS support at the high school that we'll need going into year two as well.
So to that end, Erin, are we saying that 86 covers this year's tutoring?
Yeah, so that, there's, I think, I didn't give you the hours. That's about 2,000 of hours of tutoring at the elementary level. I think it's 475 at the high school. There's a, that we should be good there. Year three is kind of the big bucket of money, the Sr3 funds that go again through September of 2024. We, as identified in the survey, you saw that there was obviously some interest in additional air quality improvements, as well as keeping some of the educational technology up to date. On top of the survey, we also administratively met to talk about what the biggest priorities are for the district. Again, HVAC replacements is one of those things that, you know, at $100,000 each, they're hard to knock off. And the SR3 money in particular requires that you earmark a certain portion of it for air quality work. For us, I think it's $165,000 is what it would need to be. We're suggesting earmarking $400,000 of it for HVAC replacements at Pembroke High School. That would be 4 units. In addition to those 4 units, we do have, as you can see there in the slide, current funding hopefully after.
For 2, yeah. So
we have current funding for 2, and then we have a proposal or plan, for lack of a better word, for 2 more at the October 19th meeting. So we'd be able to replace 8 units with these funds. And again, there is a portion of the town ARPA funds that could go to the school district for a project like this as well.
So can I stop you here just because 2 things that are important to the people watching. Is the 2 units that are going to be, 1 unit to be voted on at town meeting.
There's
No.
2.
Two units are going to be voted on at town meeting in 2 weeks.
Right, from the funds that we
From
returned
the fund
at
that
the
we
end of
returned,
last
we
year.
returned the money because we, again,
We were
trying to
making
get the
a plan.
ARPA monies to replace HVAC units. Can you just, for those who haven't been following closely and know HVAC at the high school as well as some of us, how many units are at the high school? What's the age of the ones that need to be replaced, and what's the useful life of the ones that need to be replaced?
So there are 26 rooftop units at Pembroke High School. Only 23 of them are operational. Of the 23 of them, 16 of them are 35 years or older. The useful life of an HVAC unit, if upkept properly with preventative maintenance, is anywhere from 18 to 24 years. So the HVAC system was existing to remain when we split from Silver Lake. So there was a conscious decision made not to upgrade the system at the time. So there are some really old units on top of the building. Compounded with that is the age of the units, is that the fact that there's no longer parts manufactured to fix them anymore. So we did replace 1 unit 2 years ago before COVID happened. You can see we have 2 other units that we have funding for right now to replace, on top of the 4 that we're proposing for SR3. There's an economy of scale for going out for more units at a time than 1. So we're just waiting for town meeting on the 19th to see whether we're bidding 6 units or 8 units to see if we can get, more efficiency out of that bidding process. So that is our goal for HVAC or air quality as it fits with the grant. Again, I do anticipate continuing some of the tutoring model in year 3, which is, through September of 2024. So whether it's a summer program at the end of the next school year, or even needing to beef up tutors in year 2 of the plan, depending on what we have for data. The other interest is replacement of the technology. So we were able to purchase 1,800 Chromebooks in June of 2020 with one-time funds through the Plymouth CARES Plymouth Cares money, that's about $500,000 worth of Chromebooks. At the same time, we were able to purchase 511 iPads through a Tech Essentials grant. I do not believe we would be looking to replace all of those devices, but a good portion of them are going to be ready for replacement after 3 years of pretty heavy use, going back and forth from schools a lot of the time. So the rest of the money we would like to earmark for a replacement cycle for those devices, understanding administratively and with teachers, we're still talking about what the right model is. I don't necessarily think we need one-to-one devices in our elementary schools. What we're seeing the devices used for in, second, third grade is more of a center, so 6 or 7 devices that students can kind of rotate through. I do feel like our secondary staff are really in a place where they've kind of started to soar with the technology, and we want to be able to continue to support them with that in their classroom, and for that means devices for each student. That is it for that.
What's your thoughts on this?
Is there any way to recycle the old devices, to get something for them, or, I don't know enough about it, to be honest with you, I'm just curious.
So the useful life of a Chromebook is 3 years.
3 years.
If you keep really good care of it.
Yeah.
And our students are excellent, but there's a ton of wear and tear on those devices. That's why the price point is so low. They're about $239 each. They're
Right.
not the same as buying a MacBook for your kid.
Right.
So there's not a big market for the recycling.
Yeah, no, I just wish there was some way to,
Mary Beth, I got another.
Yes. While she's getting that set up, I'll grab the sign-in sheet, so last call, if you're looking.
I know, I forgot about the second presentation.
By the way, I'm assuming all the topics are about the Herdesi update. Is that accurate? Am I wrong? Okay, I thought so. I'm gonna go on a limb, but yeah, exactly.
Boring cover slide. My goodness, it's here. Like Mary Beth, there's nothing on that slide.
The date.
The date, that's today's date.
It is today's date.
God, I got that right. Also in your packets, just before I start this, we allowed comments on the SR3 feedback survey, so I gave you all the comments there. I did take out just some identifying details on a couple of them, but left kind of the crux of the comment there. Okay, so on September 27th, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education released a press release notifying school districts that the masking requirement for all students and staff had been extended through November 1st, 21. So an additional 30 days. You'll remember it was set to expire on October 1st, and now they have pushed that date off to November 1st. We as a district wrote a letter to Governor Baker and Commissioner Riley. I myself had several phone calls with Commissioner Riley about this in particular and our interest in wanting to have it return to local control. As you can tell by the extension of the deadline, there's obviously competing pressures as well for the opposite feeling on that. In addition to the masking requirement, districts with a vaccination rate of 80% or greater may apply for a waiver to allow vaccinated students and staff to unmask beginning October 15th. So again, you'll remember that originally that date was October 1st as well. They have pushed that out until October 15th. Once a school district believes that they are at the 80%, they can submit the waiver, and that would allow students and staff that are unvaccinated, that are vaccinated, to unmask. It's important to note there are some details associated with the waiver and how you're counting students and staff. So again, you can only count staff that are that spend more than predominantly in a building, which they define as 75% of their time or more. So, for instance, myself, Mary Beth, and Jess, our offices are here at North. So if you were counting the vaccination rate of staff at North, we would count into that. You can't put us in the high school pool, even though we may go over to the high school 2 days a week to walk around. You have to be predominantly providing service in that building, as well as the students need to be spending a predominant amount of time in the building. So we do have a transition program for our 18 to 22-year-old special ed population. Those students in particular spend the bulk of their time at the middle school, so they would figure into the middle school vaccination percentage. So in order to file for the waiver, you have to signify which way you've collected your vaccination information. So these are the ways that they will allow you to collect individual proof of vaccination. So a signed self-attestation completed by either the vaccinated individual or a parent or guardian on behalf of them, stating the dates and the type of vaccine that they received. There is a statewide database available to the Department of Public Health as well as our school nurses, MIIS, the Massachusetts Immunization Information System. So if you received a vaccine over the course of the past year and a half, you either opted in or opted out of being part of the state system. So we are able to see through that system which students are vaccinated at this time. That system does sync with our SNAP software, which is the software that our school nurses use. So our school nurses, our medical professionals, can see the students in the building that are vaccinated. We do not currently collect any vaccination information for staff, so we would have to create an entire system to do that.
So, signed self-attestation, are they going to allow that to be e-signature, or does it have to be wet signature?
So it can be an e-signature. I'm going to talk to you when we get through that on the
Okay.
proposal.
Got it.
So these are our municipal vaccination rates as of last Thursday. Again, that's a report that comes out from the state every Thursday. So our 12 to 15-year-old population was at 60% vaccinated last Thursday. Our 16 to 19-year-old population was at 82% vaccinated last week. Those numbers have not moved much in the past couple of weeks. We started 3.5 weeks ago at 54% for the 12 to 15, and I think 77% for the 16 to 19. So this data itself is not enough to file for the attestation, to file for the waiver. You need to know specifically, grade by grade, building by building, the number of students that are vaccinated. As I said, we do have the ability to run a report from SNAP to see who's vaccinated if you've opted into the state database. Those vaccination rates, which are on the next slide, are obviously not accurate. So there is a glitch in the state system where when you're running the report for a specific grade level, there's an alphanumeric problem with the code, and so it stops when it finds a mismatch. So you can see there that in best case scenario, it says 37% of the 9th grade is vaccinated. That doesn't correlate with the municipal vaccination numbers. So my recommendation is that we get a better idea of our numbers, and the way that we do that is by allowing families to fill out a self-attestation. So on the last page here, you have a sample of it. I printed it out on regular paper if you can't read it because it's a little bit warped in the box there. So all it is asking you the first name, last name, date of birth, and grade of your student, the date and the type of your first and second vaccine, and then you're just attesting to the fact that the information is accurate. I don't believe we're at 38%. I also don't believe that we're at 80% at any one of our buildings, but we need to know where we're at. This is a good first step for us. It gives us some information that we can start gathering sooner rather than later while the state continues to work on the glitch in the software. My recommendation is that we allow families to fill out this attestation, and then once the state software glitch has been resolved, our nurses can then tell where the mismatches are. So if we have 185 attestations for 9th graders, but we only have 180 proof of vaccination in the state database, there's only 5 families that we're following up with, as opposed to starting, calling each one.
So Are we-
So we're not looking for you to give us a copy of your vaccination card or anything like that.
Okay, so I fill this out. They check in the database. Are they just checking for a match to say yep? Because what happens to the person who clicks on Pfizer, but they actually got Moderna and that, or the
We're just
database-
looking for a
We're just
match of
looking for a
vaccine.
match. Got it,
No,
just want to
yeah,
make sure,
I-
okay. No, I just want to make sure
Yep.
what, just to set the expectation.
Yep.
And we can do this electronically, so
We
we're
can
not
do this
running forms back and
electronically. We
forth.
can put it as a tab on our website, so that families can go in and record their responses with an e-signature. And then it gives us the opportunity to be monitoring it as well as create the CSV file to compare to the state upload, so.
Okay, so at this point, you would be looking for us to vote to begin to collect the data.
Through an attestation.
Yeah. And then do you also need us, would you ask us to vote to file when you got to 80%?
So I would not be asking you to do that at this time. I do think we should have a conversation when we get to 75% about what the 80% looks like. So in order to file the attestation for the district, the way it's worded right now, they're looking for you to collect proof of vaccination. They're looking for you to ensure that students and staff that are not vaccinated remain masked. Obviously, there's nobody that has successfully gotten a waiver yet since the date is October 15th. I think you all should be having a conversation about what we expect that to look like in our buildings. You're able to set your own expectations here in the district before I click the box and submit that waiver.
So it's not going, so no matter what, the unvaccinated have to remain masked regardless of the 80%?
So that's what the words say. But realistically, I cannot give somebody a clipboard of names and say, walk around the building, oh, Sue,
That's
you don't have a
ridiculous.
you gotta wear a mask.
it's
That's
impossible.
a violation of somebody's health information. So I just
Got it.
want to make sure that folks understand what this committee's expectations are once we're waiver eligible or not waiver eligible. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It does. But then it also has to be what our expectation is, that we're not having people walk around with clipboards. That's not their job. It's
Right.
just, it's wrong in many ways,
Right.
right? Just, so, okay.
We do not, at any point of your employment, collect staff vaccination information. So I do think once students get to a number, whether that's number 70 or 75%, we should start collecting staff vaccination information as well. Our staff is about 82% vaccinated per self-reporting, so they're not going to be the crux on why we don't kick to the waiver, but there's no place for us to house their information securely right now. We don't have SNAP for staff. We don't have that type of medical support for staff. So this attestation is only for students.
Has Desi said anything about the,
They want you to collect copies of vaccination records for staff, copies of cards. I would suggest that you do an attestation for staff as well. I just don't think it's worth starting that now until we know kind of where the kids are at.
And they can all, and if we did it, we do
They can do the
electronically,
same,
they
yep.
can upload it, got it.
Mhm.
Is this a
And
form?
who's going to manage these receipts of the
So right
attestation?
now, we have enough internal capacity with, our software manager as well as some clerical support. There's no true medical information shared in this report, but the follow-up step, if necessary, would be our school nurses, which is why I'd like to get that number as low as possible.
Sure, sure.
Erin, is this our form or is this a state form?
This is a sample from maybe Whitman Hanson or Marshfield. It's not our form. The state didn't give you a sample.
Would it make sense to have the location or where you had the shot done?
No, we don't need that information.
We don't need that, okay.
As little information as possible.
Okay.
The more data we collect that is just for whatever reason isn't helpful. I would even argue, why do we need something as simple as date of birth and even grade? Why don't we go first name, last name? And if there's a mismatch,
So.
do we have,
So at the secondary level, there are students that are in grade 10 that should be in 11 but have a birth year of a grade 12. So we've got to put them by their birth date.
I get that piece, but aren't we going to know that by what's in SNAP?
I'm going to know that by SNAP, but the reporting is so low right now, I'd
Got
rather
it.
get as much accurate information
Okay.
that we're controlling.
Okay. I'm just trying to get as little information as we can.
And you said this was from Whitman Hanson, or
This is somewhere on the South Shore. It was floating around on the superintendent listserv. We're all kind of in the same place right now. There's nobody doing anything different than what we're doing or what we're talking about here. There's no, magic way to just get the waiver without producing any type of information.
Got it.
the other districts are the others close or know that they've?
There are other districts that are close. Here on the South Shore, there are a couple of surrounding communities that have a higher vaccination percentage. And I know, in particular in Metro West, there's several communities that are past the vaccination percentage but are not submitting for a waiver. So, there's a little bit of that going on. As a group, we're meeting, the South Shore superintendents are meeting on October 12th to kind of touch base on where people are at with this, kind of best practices and what they're getting for feedback from the
Yeah.
community.
I mean, that's helpful information, but we have to do what's right
Yep.
to us, right?
And this info will be basically not even under lock and key. This is going to be secure data, locked and protected, not sitting around, passing around.
Right, so no, I mean, obviously, Pembroke is a Google district. All of our communication happens through Google, all of our forms are in Google, all of our student records are in Google. So it'll be housed in Google, but it's the same encryption and security level as all of our
It's in the
student
Google-
data
it's in the Google
information.
Cloud, yep.
The only other way to do it moving forward, and please, I hope that we're not doing it moving forward, is to include it as part of the registration package, which is a different type of security through PowerSchool.
Can we just,
That's the
yeah,
only difference.
let's just worry about what's ahead of us
Yeah,
right now. And
let's
the
just-
the
yeah,
two things that,
exactly.
I guess, I'll make two comments. One is I think you need to remove other, and then other from both doses, and then J&J from the second dose. That's just one comment.
Yeah.
The other comment I would make is if someone doesn't feel comfortable doing electronically, they can do it through a
Paper, yep.
form. In that form, it should be specific, is you return it to the school nurse only. It does not go to the office. If it goes to the office, they turn them away and send them to the nurse, please.
Well,
And no
keep in
other
mind
staff
that
has-
things are dropped off here. We're not,
Yeah, the box is outside, correct.
so if you're sending it in with your students labeled for the school nurse, that would be.
Right,
Okay,
because it's
yeah.
only the school nurse collecting it.
If the
No other
student-
staff
if the
knows,
student-
no
if the
teachers
student brings
know.
in, yeah.
Nope,
Right, nobody else is
knows.
opening it.
It's just,
No.
yeah.
Right.
Okay.
I mean, I understand that people's medical information is very secure.
Right.
But keep in mind, we have high school students walking around with copies of their physicals for sports and whatnot.
No,
so
I
it's-
get it. It's just, I guess where. and
Dropping them on
I'll
any
only-
desk we
I'll-
can find and saying
I'll
we're
only
handing them in.
Yeah, I'll only speak for me and my frustration is they just keep, they moved us back.
Right.
Or they moved the goalpost further, however you want to
keep
analogy.
moving the line.
And now, I feel like they're changing the rules or making the goalpost higher.
Right.
I think that's a
Um,
very valid point. And is there any indication that they're going to add more information grab? Because I'm uncomfortable. I'm going to just say, if it gets any grabbier.
No, I mean, I think it's. Yeah, but I do think that, on the call that we had with Commissioner Riley, he did talk about the state numbers and the state trends, because there is still that question out there about elementary kids.
Yeah.
What are we doing? What number do we have to get to for
Right.
a community for elementary kids to
It-
unmask?
it's-
So
it's
we're
just-
looking for more guidance on that as well.
Yeah, because they have the database that they say is the record. So why do I have to give them something? And I'm
Right, but
sorry,
you
I
can
don't
opt
mean to-
out. As an
No, I
individual, you
understand
can
that.
opt out.
You can opt out, but I guess my point is, I'm sorry, I don't mean to be
Yeah.
frustrated with you, because I'm not.
I don't take it personally.
I know you don't.
It's like a little
I just-
family.
But here's my point, is I gotta give you a piece of paper, for then you to go check to make sure I filled out the piece of paper right. When you
I
could
want to
just-
do very little checking.
Which means you should just be able to look at,
Theirs, and it's not working, right? And so we had a 2-hour call about it earlier this week. They
Okay.
understand, there are very frustrated districts out there, because we're coming up on the 15th, and we don't
That's-
have the information.
I didn't even want to bring up the fact that that's 10 days away,
Yep.
right? 9 business days, because we've already gone through one of them.
Right.
Okay. Other questions here? I'll look at Lance. Lance hasn't said a word. You want to say anything?
Taking it in.
I figured as much. David, anything?
No, I'm good, thank you.
Okay, why don't we go to comment? I apologize. The one thing I didn't do during your budget update, and I'll give it after this, is update from a meeting yesterday with Representative Cutler and Senator Moran, so there's some good information. Okay. Maureen, you want to go first? You okay going first? I was trying to.
Elementary school. Thanks for the presentation. I think that is not the direction for action items we should be focusing on at all, because I think, like you guys pointed out with the way you're collecting the information, and then once you do get to 80%, the way that now they're kind of seeming a little more strict with the wording of, where you guys all kind of took a stance of like, we would never be collecting papers and doing this, and now they're giving you more literature to do so. It's just going to get progressive. So in that sense, we're going to have medical segregation amongst the kids. It's going to be show me your papers and have the identifying symbol across your face. Just not something I think a school should be dealing with. You guys don't deserve to be dealing with this at all. And definitely not something our kids deserve to be dealing with. So not something, I'm not interested in anything that was on there at all as far as moving forward on any of those action items. I'm more interested in the ones that you guys developed and everyone developed here as a committee. And thank you guys all for all the work that you do. I hope that my comments, my concerns don't change the fact that I really do appreciate what you do. So I want to start with that, because maybe you might feel differently after my comments and stuff. But I hope not. So some things that I'm looking for updates on are like the Hanover letter. I know that you did just bring it up, so thank you. I didn't hear what the answer was on it, though. I did hear that, it's supposed to be like obvious because of the information we're getting, but that's not what I'm looking for. What was the exact?
Right, so they don't give you a response. We sent the letter to Governor Baker and Commissioner Riley. Their offices don't issue a response. We haven't gotten a response.
But he gave you a response on he would pull your funds if you didn't comply?
So I personally had a call with Jeff Riley about the first time when we talked about what would happen if we didn't have the mask, if we didn't meet the mask requirement. And I also called him this time to talk about the desire in communities like Pembroke, because we're not alone here on the South Shore on what we're looking for it to look like, in our desire to have local control. So, my conversation with Commissioner Riley on that specifically, I can say that the majority of superintendents in the districts are not looking for that level of local control. They find it to be slightly easier for the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education to make a requirement that applies to all. This committee has talked before about kind of how communities break out urban versus suburban and who has power when it comes to those type of decisions. But Commissioner Riley was very clear that the consensus of school districts was that they were not interested in local control. He understood what we were looking for. He understood, our desire to use our local health data in making decisions that are right for our community. But at the same time, at his level, I believe there's competing pressures there, and there's more pressure coming from the side that is looking for a masking requirement.
Can I just jump in? I just have a question, because I think it's related to that. Have they given any indication of what's the metric before they pull back the mandate besides?
No, but he did say that is part of what they're working on with their medical group now is, again, the unanswered question is what's happening at elementary. What if we get to 80% at middle schools and high schools, we're still talking about masking, 60 to 70% of your students because they're elementary students. He did not say exactly what the metric would be. He did talk about using local data, which is counterintuitive to the fact that you're not giving it to us for local control.
I guess,
Right.
yeah, because when they look, what are metrics, I'm sorry, I don't mean to take it.
Oh, no,
but-
please
but
do.
Are they looking at the metrics of spread at elementary level? Are they looking, right, because if they're just looking at vaccine information, then that's kind of.
No, so they're looking at hospitalization rates. They're looking
Okay.
at the demographics that we would hope for them to be looking at. We do continue to report cases through to DESE in any student or staff in-school case. So they are tracking if there is transmission. They do follow up with you about those type of things.
Okay.
They're not seeing school-based transmission. So
Got it.
same
Okay, sorry.
phenomenon as last
Go
year.
ahead, Melissa.
Okay, so you said that we didn't get an answer, but at the
The
same.
committee did not get a formal answer from their letter.
Well, I
did
think we
have-
should still ask for one.
Sure.
I think it is still very important that we don't take general answers for things, and if we are requiring something, just like they are requiring stuff of us to comply, that we are requiring their compliance as well. We deserve that respect. They're getting that respect. Our kids are masked right now, so I do want it, and I think that everyone here wants it. So I would like the answer to that, and I think that you guys gave a date, and he didn't respect that. You gave on or before October 1st, am I correct?
Right.
And he did not respect that, so I feel like that's kind of some leeway where it's, if we're not getting any compliance, why would we continue to comply? And if they would like us to be complying with they need to give their respective answers for important issues. In school committee meeting 8:31, Adam asked about individual COVID liability waivers. Erin, you responded that you would reach out to Jeff Riley about this. I just wanted to know if you did reach out about that.
So we started the reaching out with our legal counsel,
Okay.
Emerson and Emerson out of Westwood, and unfortunately, as legal counsel for the school committee, he cannot give you an opinion to purposely defy a masking mandate. So
So we couldn't have people sign waivers to go maskless,
Correct.
is what you were
Correct.
told? That-
Is what you were told
from the legal counsel for the school committee.
from
So
legal
they don't work
counsel,
for the
but not
state,
from
they
Jeff
work-
Riley
no.
that you said you were going to reach out to?
No, so I mean, I'll be honest with everybody watching, everyone at this table, and everyone in the audience. I actually know Jeff Riley from working in Boston, so I pick up the phone more often than not and ask him questions. And I did specifically ask him, even though I knew that the legal opinion was that we couldn't do it, just to, you want to think, am I the only one thinking down these crazy rabbit holes? Are other people thinking this? Is this happening in other places? He couldn't imagine an instance where you would be able to do that. And he even said, if I were you, I'd reach out to your legal counsel. So that's more of a non-answer, I think, would be that. That wasn't
It's still
something that the
important
state was
to
supporting.
follow up with things that you say that you'll do.
Yeah.
So, thank you. On 8:31, Dan asked about mask breaks and if we could be creative to create more maskless time, such as unmasking every other child to get that 6 feet, using larger spaces, etc. Erin, you stated you're happy to sit down with Lisa tomorrow to see if she wants to help you think creatively about it. Did you do this?
Yep, Lisa and I sat down. There's spaces in each of our elementary schools, as well as our middle school and high school, where students can unmask at 6 feet of space in the building. I know weather was starting to be a concern when we talked about the fact that most people take their kids outside for mask breaks. So that has happened. I think it's also important to point out not every teacher is comfortable with students unmasking in their room at less than 6 feet of space. So though we're an educational institution, we're also an employer. And it's important that we're thinking about, pieces associated with our employees as well. But Lisa and I did go through each building to talk about where are some spaces where kids can go. I know at the secondary level there was some questions, whether through email or it might even come up at the last meeting, whether students could self-identify the need for a mask break. So during some of the class assemblies that the high school had in particular, and I know during some of the guidance pieces that they had at the middle school, that the teachers talked with the students and the administrators talked with the students about identifying if you need more time, stepping outside the classroom, that type of thing, putting those parameters in place for kids.
Okay, so I knew you were going to say that about the educators, so that's actually right here on my next thing. So educators not being comfortable with kids unmasking. So teachers' fears and opinions, let's just say if exactly what we're fighting for is local control to be given back to us, and tomorrow we could unmask the kids in the class, it would be optional. How are you going to address those teachers' fears and concerns then? And how is that going to look? And how is that going to be projected onto our kids when now a teacher who's saying she's uncomfortable with safely unmasking every other kid that, right now that we're asking for? How is that going to be when now they don't have that option at all? And tomorrow they have all the kids there that wanted to be unmasked. Are you not ready to support them?
So as with many things that have happened during the COVID-19 pandemic, a masking requirement, a lack of a masking requirement is a subject of impact bargaining with all of our unions. So we'd be sitting down, administration with the teachers union, to discuss what the impact of that change in their environment would be for them.
So one thing to help on that is not every classroom looks the same, meaning some teachers last year had masks and visors, right?
Some had face shields, some had plexiglass.
Plexiglass. So every,
levels.
I think what we did last year, and I would anticipate us do going forward, is we're not going to have, how many classrooms do we have across the board? A couple hundred? I think, just rough.
280, 280.
Yeah, we're not going to have 280 different variations
Okay.
across, but we would probably have, somewhere, I remember talking with a teacher who had a concern over a family member, so they had a little bit different situation than somebody else who had a different concern. So what we would do is we would work with them to something that they felt comfortable with, but then also help the students.
So why aren't we doing that now?
We are doing.
So that, so that we can explore more maskless time for the students, because I
Right,
hear
so
that
the only way to do that is to put plexiglass around each student, right? And that's not,
to unmask every other,
so Lisa's not a proponent of unmasking every other student.
okay, so this is an update I didn't hear in any of the other meetings. That's
So
why I'm,
Lisa is not in favor of unmasking every other student, just in the sense that it creates close contact. So if I am unmasked next to you for 2 10-minute mask breaks, I'm at less than 6 feet of space. So, you know, her preference was if students are unmasking indoors for mask breaks, that they be 6 feet apart. So it's not mask, unmask, mask, and that's the 6 feet.
okay, so the, between the
person-
two that's right
Yeah.
next to you, both have to be masked.
Yes.
To maintain
She
the-
wants, she would like
She
the 6 feet of.
wants, or
well,
that's what?
Anytime a student is unmasked, it creates a close contact unless they're 6 feet apart.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. Just because the part of with the educators, because I know that you're giving a lot of consideration to their feelings and, you know, their needs, and they're uncomfortable, but, you know, our kids matter. Our kids' feelings matter, our kids' needs, our kids being uncomfortable within the classroom matters as well. So if the double barrier between a kid's mask and a teacher's mask, and the kids now removing their mask is what the teacher's worried about, I mean, like you said, it could be their mask plus a face shield, and now they have a double barrier again. So if that was, you know, but just in general, there is going to be some mental illness coming out from this pandemic. The teachers could be experiencing it, so I think things like, for if you can identify your teachers that are already showing fears and struggle with the thought of kids being unmasked, because that's our mission right now, is to get the kids to have the decision again. So I think they need to be aware of that. That is what we are hoping for as soon as possible. And if that's something that they're struggling with, I mean, counseling, there needs, like the double masking, you need to be able to accommodate the teacher, and a room full of 20 kids shouldn't always have to accommodate
Right, and
just
we're
one
already having
teacher.
conversations with the Pembroke Teachers Association about that. Those
Okay.
conversations have been ongoing since March of 2020. So we meet quite regularly to talk about strategies and supports and all of that.
Right, there just has to be some accountability with the updates to these things. I would ask you guys, do you guys feel that, you know, any and all activities that we are able to return to normal, like, would that be the general, like, thought that they should? There's things like open house that, you know, other communities did have in person that we didn't. One other thing that I personally received was like a special education meeting. It was sent to me, and it was listed as virtual. I called, I asked about it because I just wasn't comfortable with virtual for such an important meeting. And it was very easily switched to in-person, which I'm grateful for. I just don't know why the default isn't
Sure, and we talked
anything
about that
normal.
at the 817 and the 831 school committee meeting, that part of the best practices that we identified as part of last year was limiting the amount of visitors to the building. We talked about meetings being virtual for special education, but the option to come in, because again, it is a pretty intensive meeting where parents would like to be here. As far as open house, we as a district selected to have open house virtually. We got more parents at open house last year across the district than we've ever gotten before. So I do think both teachers and administrators felt as though that option was a little bit more convenient for families. Was it a product of the fact that more parents were anxious about school last year than this year? Potentially. But the decision to have open house virtual was one that we made at this level.
Yeah, but real quick on the special, Jess, can we, rather than just default it either way, to in-person or to virtual, can we just, when the meeting's scheduled, can we just give them the option?
So
To
the
say which
guidance that was put out was recommended for virtual, but I'm working with parents to accommodate if people want to come in.
So the guidance from Desi,
Yes.
so then can we put then, in-person option is available, just so people know?
Yeah, I did put it out, but I
Okay.
can do it again. I sent a letter.
Or
to
just,
everyone.
okay, I'm just thinking when the communication to say we're scheduling a meeting, or this meeting is, we're scheduling a meeting for October 15th. You know, the meeting, here's the meeting information, if you would like an in-person meeting, please contact X. I'm thinking if you, because the people may miss the communication, just trying to think if you add it to the bottom as an option, it addresses that concern. Is that fair?
That's fair, thank you. I didn't know it could be, I'm glad that it wasn't a fight, because I was gonna bring up, you know, that we have fundraising people running through the buildings, which I'm appreciative of. But at the same time, if I wasn't able to attend my child's special education meeting, but I knew that, you know, things like this, people are able to come, I wouldn't be happy with that. But I'm glad, I hope that people know that you can come in person to attend those important meetings. Another thing, I know that in a couple of the meetings, you've proudly said how we don't have any disciplinary actions with the masks. They haven't come across your desk, so to speak. That doesn't mean that's not happening. That doesn't mean that things, mental health and, I would call it mask harassment, isn't happening in the classroom. I wanted to give you a couple of examples of things that are said to kids. I know toddlers that can wear their masks better than you. Pull it up over your nose or you'll be wearing it outside during mask break. Those are threats. Those are bullying. That's bullying. For a teacher to say something like that to a student in front of a whole room of kids, you guys have to imagine it doesn't feel good. It makes that child feel very isolated and uncomfortable. These are things that happen. I think it's something that needs to be looked at, and it's something that needs to be addressed.
So I think, I just want to stop you before you
Mhm.
go on. As parents, I think it's important to recognize that we don't necessarily hear everything. Please don't
Right.
assume that that myself, Mary Beth, or Jess know everything that's happening. When we discuss administratively around what masking looks like, so disciplinary action of suspension, all of that comes through my office, so I know when that's happening. When checking in with administrators about what masking looks like in schools, I mean, Mary Beth, Jess, and I are in schools every day anyways, what they're saying is the most that we've had to do is verbal reminders. Again, never in my wildest dreams would I think what you just shared is an appropriate verbal reminder for a student of how to wear a mask.
Right,
So
and I wouldn't
if something like that happens, we teach our kids self-advocacy, and I'm a huge proponent of that, but as a parent, please reach out to myself or the building principal, because that's not okay. That is not a verbal
Right.
reminder of how to wear a mask.
Can
So-
we, a couple meetings ago, I don't even remember because they all blur together, someone talked about they weren't doing mask breaks at one of the schools.
Right, and
Right,
we
and
have
we
confirmed
set-
that they're all getting
Right,
mask breaks.
there were communication came out to set the expectation, or reset the expectation. Can, and I don't know what it would look like, but can you think through what reconfirm our expectation of mask breaks and mask,
Right, that's what I'm asking, is
yeah.
that as much that can be.
thank you. I
As
couldn't
much
remember.
normalcy that can be brought back and expectations can be of normal practices, I think that's what you guys represent, choice, neutrality. I think it needs to, be reiterated with teachers and stuff. I think that, I don't think it's fair that they have to be the mask police. And I think maybe there's some frustration in it, which is why some of these, if I'm going to play devil's advocate, why some of these things are said. Thankfully, these things that were, not thankfully, but it was at a high school level. If my younger one came back saying these things, I would have been very upset. I think high school kids are acknowledging the power struggles and stuff that are going on a little bit more and are able to identify certain things as not right. Are you guys getting feedback from teachers? Because this is one thing that's not really ever mentioned. I'm sorry I'm taking up so much time. Feedback from teachers that, are not for masking, like they're giving you feedback that they're expressing it makes it harder to teach, harder to understand students. What attention and plans of action are you giving that?
So we haven't formally solicited feedback from staff about that. We did obviously.
I think that you should. Please.
Right, so when you collect feedback, there's
Mhm.
got to be actionable items to it, right? So you don't just want to be collecting information in a vacuum. And at this point, I'm not necessarily sure, other than, at the building level, when they're talking about maybe the difficulty for students to hear and the need for an FM system or that type of accommodation with the masking, just collecting anecdotal information, without
You
the
ha-
ability to do something with it.
Well, you
has me
have
a little
teachers.
hesitant. We did elicit feedback from staff over the summer around whether or not they were in favor of masking or not in favor of masking, as well as the series of questions that we asked families.
Mhm.
At the same time, the PTA, which is the teachers union here, also surveyed their members and got feedback about it. So we do have that feedback, but we haven't reached out formally since the start of school to elicit feedback on, concerns with masking. But I just want to make sure if we're collecting concerns that we're offering solutions for that, and there's some things that we don't have a solution for right now.
Well,
So-
right, because right now you have some teachers removing their masks because they're saying it's hard for them to teach the class, and for them to talk through them, which is probably why a lot of people are using personal choice to not wear them when having to present things and stuff. It does. It makes it hard. It makes it hard for communication. So you do have some teachers that are doing that, so it's confusing to students who are, if they're not getting the same opportunity. I mean, we have little ones reading out loud. Are they able to remove their masks to read out loud?
So in the classroom, all students and staff should be masked. Teachers shouldn't
Right.
be removing their masks to present
And you can
information. There
imagine-
are obviously some instances where students receiving speech therapy, where there's plexiglass and they're unmasked. There's some OT and PT pieces. There's some different type of masks that have the clear vinyl here. But students and staff are required to be masked while in the building unless they're eating or on a mask break.
Okay, so
So I can put that as part of our reminder too. Staff should not be removing their masks. to
I'm proud
present.
of the teacher that's doing it. I'm sorry. I don't know who it is personally, or I wouldn't even name who it was.
I wouldn't expect
I
you to
wouldn't
name
want
who
you,
it
I wouldn't
was.
want you.
Because I'm
Not a
actually
public
proud
meeting.
that they're doing that because the kids need that. The kids need to be able to understand. A teacher needs to be able to feel comfortable while she's teaching. I was just trying to make the point that a teacher is doing it, so if there is opportunity for that to happen, her excuse is that she's 6 feet apart. If there is excuse for that, if there's a reason for it and there's logic behind it and it can be done, I mean, if one student's reading out loud, I don't understand why they can't remove their mask if everyone else is masked, and that one student can read out loud or say what they're trying to say or give instruction. I mean, we do have little kids, littler than my kids, little kids, and you're going to see an increase in speech therapy needs and everything else if people aren't being properly understood. So, I mean, that was important. So there are just things that are going on behind the scenes. So I would think maybe, and I know that there are teachers saying that they can't do the masks. It's very hard. So maybe an updated one since school has started and they have been having to use them. So I just did have one more thing, and then you'll be rid of me.
It's a lot of papers for one more thing, though.
I know, right?
It's a long
Lockers. So my child actually said she doesn't even want me to talk about lockers, but that in the future my younger child isn't going to need the locker. And there are students right now that do need the locker. So I'll just read what I wrote to you guys just for transparency. Students need access to lockers throughout the day. It should be a student's needs choice, not a teacher convenience choice. When freedoms are put on hold due to COVID, they should not simply end because it was convenient for those who they don't affect. Teachers do not have to carry their items all day like the students. Locker breaks have been a part of school forever and should backpack should not have to be carried all day as a teacher preference. This is a responsibility and a right of students, and they deserve to have access to them and state the students' rights to use lockers immediately. That's what I would ask about that. I mean, I don't understand. I did hear how they're able to get into class quicker and they're able to have more class time, but then I'm getting told by my child that they're doing slideshows for how to wear a mask during school time. So, I mean, if I had to pick between the two, I probably don't think that presenting a slideshow to high school students on masking is...
Right, so traditionally at the high school, students don't use the lockers that are there, so you have 2 minutes to pass between class. Your locker could be in the English wing and you need to get to science. Historically, the only time we've seen real locker use at the high school is for sporting equipment.
But they are.
They're allowed, so there's
Yeah,
not a
at the high
COVID
school
protocol
it
that
is.
says that you can't have a locker.
It's the middle school that can't right
At the middle
now.
school, the conscious decision was made as part of a handbook change to not have students access lockers. And I know that you prefaced it by saying it was a teacher preference, but I want to point out that the reason for the change is because students are more prepared for class. That's not necessarily a teacher preference. It's taking a little bit less of the executive functioning skill responsibility off the student to be ready for class. And so I have a 7th grade boy, bless anybody that has one too, because their executive functioning is not high on their list. The school that my son goes to does not use lockers either. His backpack is large. It's not necessarily heavy. There's very few books. Nobody has classroom books necessarily. It's the 5 binders. And when Donna was here, Dr. Mcas Ela was here a couple weeks ago, she talked about minimizing the size of that. She also talked about coming back to the lockers because the concern was around some of the winter
The
gear, right?
jackets,
Carrying
yeah.
the jacket and whatnot. And so that is on the agenda for later in October to come back to at the middle school level to talk about giving students access for their coats and their hats and whatnot. You know, there's been some other concerns raised at the committee with some follow-up items that they would like information on. You know, is the weight of the backpack a prolonged concern for students? And so
Right.
we're gathering that information now with our school physician and whatnot. So the plan is to give an extensive update on lockers, as extensive as an update on lockers can be, at the second meeting in October. But I just want to clarify, it's not teacher preference, right? It's what they were seeing.
I'm sorry about my wording on that. It was more about the explanation you gave of the teachers gave feedback on how they felt kids
Right,
were more
students
ready.
were
The
ready to
teachers gave
learn
the
when they came to
feedback.
class, yeah.
Yeah, I just didn't hear much on student feedback and their needs as far as carrying around this stuff. So that's why
Sure.
I worded it as a teacher preference, is that's how I took it away from that meeting. So I want to end with saying some things I'm very happy about, so that maybe you guys will still like me.
Is that why there's so many papers?
Yeah. No, it's just really quick. Bryanttville movie night that was just put on, it was awesome. It was like such a great, I don't even
That's all the
like, I'll
PTO,
start
that has nothing
crying
to do
if I
with
start
us.
talking about it, because it was just one of those moments where you sat down and you were like, oh my God, this is how it should be. The kids were having a blast. There were some technical difficulties, but like,
There
it didn't
always
even
is.
matter because everyone was just so happy to like be at school and be with your friends and see everyone and see like parent involvement again. There's no parent involvement in schools anymore. Like, it's sad. So to see everyone together in a school setting, like a school type setting, doing, you know, just, it was the best thing ever. So I'm so happy about that. And the homecoming that's coming up. The fact that the students, you know, thoughts, and because I don't know if you guys are aware, but like Silver Lake had it was a disaster. The kids left to go somewhere where they could be maskless because they weren't even able to like properly hang out with their friends. And the feedback from it was that it was terrible. All the kids left early. They all went somewhere where they could actually go hang out with their friends. So the fact that Pembroke took a different, you know, stance on it and are going to try to accommodate it outside. I mean, there's some worry about the weather, but
It's going to be a little chilly, but we do
But
have
you guys did
indoor
it-
warming
warming
stations with
stations,
students
yeah,
being 6 feet
so-
apart for them to warm up.
so that, it just made me so happy because it showed me that there is some action taken to make some things as normal as possible. And all I ask in the end of this is please, anything that can return to normal, that needs to be the default, if we can. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey. Here you go. Real quick while Maureen's coming, just, I got this question, it kind of ties into a couple of your things about normal in schools and that type of thing. I got the couple questions. I got this question a couple times with regard to town meeting, and people will look and say, oh, we're in a school, why are we maskless? And I know certain towns have moved their meetings to other buildings because of their interpretation of the DESI mandate. Erin is going to correct me if I say anything wrong. The mandate applies to the school day, the school activities. It does
School-related activities.
school-related activities. So therefore, if we had a school event such as an after-school program, if we have the high school volleyball program, if we have a basketball game when we get to November, and hopefully we're not in the same situation, those are under the guidance of DESI's mandate. A meeting like this where it's not a school-related activity is not. So that leads to the question, the opinion of the Pembroke Public Schools is that we are not saying there has to be masks at town meeting. That is not something that comes under us. The only person who can dictate, should rephrase that, the only two organizations that could dictate, three, think about the hierarchy, who could say masks have to be worn at town meeting is if the governor comes up with an indoor mask mandate, if the Board of Health comes with an indoor mask mandate, or the moderator, Stephen Dodge, says there's a mask mandate. If there's masks at town meeting, it is not going to be because this body required it, or the superintendent, or anybody else. So I want to make that, or Principal Talbot, I want to make that clear, that if someone's looking for us to do it, we're not going to do it. It's not in our purview. It's outside of our lanes, whatever you want to use for the analogy.
Right,
Unless somebody was-
similarly, if we rent our space to a dance
That's
recital
it.
on a
Thank
Saturday,
you.
we don't require that the students are, the dance students and the families are wearing masks. That's
Yeah.
outside of our purview.
I just want to make sure that's clear, and I don't think this board wants to take that approach, but if there are questions, so I apologize, but I wanted to get that clarification out. I keep making notes because I keep forgetting things.
That's good information, thank you.
You're welcome.
Good evening, everyone. Nice to see you all here today, in the audience as well, and you watching online.
Can you state your name for the
Yes,
for the one
yes,
person who
hello,
doesn't
my
know you?
name's Maureen J.C. I'm a resident in Pembroke, and I have 3 children in the school district, 1 in high school, 1 at the middle, and 1 here at North. I did take many notes when you were reviewing all the wonderful information you provided to us tonight, so please bear with me while I go through them. I'll try to, a lot of them were addressed or brought up, so. But it's, I'd like to talk to, you kind of touched upon it, the union, the teachers' union, them being a very relevant stakeholder in what's happening with this mask mandate. And I was wondering if there is a representative of the teachers' PTA at this table. I'm not familiar. Are they allowed to have representation here?
So they're allowed to, it's an open public meeting. They're allowed to attend the meeting. They're not a member of the board here.
Gotcha, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to figure out, so as far as teachers go, I'm concerned, because I know everyone's hopeful, but I don't think that this is ever going to change, and this is our permanent new existence. So with that said, are we going to face a shortage of teachers in the future? I think that that's something that we should think about. Have you communicated with the union? Where do you stand in regards to teachers with, I hate to say it, but forced vaccinations? Will they be allowed to continue teaching in this district? And how do you intend to deal with those issues of shortages if that is something that does happen?
So why don't you talk about the staffing piece. As far as a vaccine requirement, I guess as an employer, nobody on this committee has asked to put it on the agenda to discuss it or include it. So if it comes from this committee, if it would happen, two things would have to happen. One is a member would have to say, we need to put this on the agenda, and then it would have to garner 3 votes or a majority, depending upon how many are here. I don't see this at this table, anybody interested in that. Nobody's expressed that at all, so if it comes, it would be a surprise to me.
Well, I appreciate your positivity.
If it comes from
Right.
this, if it
And
comes from the
I
Commonwealth.
believe-
Right,
So
yeah. If it comes from the
teachers
Commonwealth.
in Pembroke are considered employees of the town of Pembroke. So there's another board that makes decisions for the town as well. And it's important to know that their decisions can affect the work here.
Sure.
But a mandate for vaccination is something that, again, would need to be impact bargained with staff. And in the places where you've seen it, whether it's California or I think there's a couple of other school districts, New York, there's an exemption policy as well, right, for medical and religious exemptions. And we'd have to really vet all of that out through the impact bargaining process and what that looks like for staff. I don't, again, anticipate that being something that we're dealing with this school year, just based off of the timing. But I think even without without a vaccine mandate, a teacher shortage is a real thing, right? And so I think what we saw last year was teachers got burnt out. We saw teachers that chose to leave the profession early because of the pandemic. So that is on our radar. We do in Pembroke have a pretty low turnover rate for teachers. Administrators are a little bit different, but for teachers it is pretty low, and I think that is a testament to this group of 5 as an employer and their value of the staff here. But again, that's definitely something that is on the radar, not just in Pembroke, but Massachusetts and nationally. So we are obviously thinking about that and what steps we can take to keep the great staff that we have, because we do have excellent staff here.
Can I just follow up on one thing you said, because you said, correct, there's another body in town that could.
There's 2.
There's 2 other bodies that could. I would strongly hope that if either one of them were even considering it, first, they would reach out to us and ask our opinion, and second, involve us in the decision, because they would be making, as much as we don't make decisions that impact other boards, and we don't make comments about other boards' actions while we're sitting here, we would expect that same level of courtesy or professionalism.
Right, you
So
guys have the most
I'll leave it
employees.
at that.
With all due respect, I think we're all finding out control over decisions that are made at this table, and everything that you, in the best intentions, are completely thrown out the window in a second. So we do not have control over the teachers being forced to take a vaccine. So I'm wondering if you could please communicate with the union, ask them how many of their staff intend to, or A, can you do an anonymous survey?
So we did,
Please?
we have anonymous survey results
Can
from
you share
staff
the
based
results
on
with the public,
vaccination.
or is that private information?
I think we did share them a while back.
We shared them before we made the didn't we, wasn't that
Yeah,
part of this
I
August
can-
17th?
Maureen, I
I'll go
can-
back to my archives and
Yeah,
check
no,
it
Yeah,
out.
I,
if
so I think it was even before we were starting to talk about vaccine opportunities for staff and how could we get opportunities here. So how many people were planning on getting vaccinated, and that number was, I think 89% of those that responded were planning on getting vaccinated when the vaccine became available to them, and that was over the course of last spring, so.
Thank you. Again, just want to reiterate, I think that is a big concern that is going to be facing you very soon. And I suggest you prepare for it, whether you negotiate with other teachers to increase class sizes, or please review your contract with your union in your bargaining. If maybe you need to rebargain, increase class sizes. I don't know if that's a detail. I've never reviewed your contract. And is the contract available online for us to see?
Yep, so the contracts are on the town website or on the DESE website. They're not, the new ones that the school committee just ratified 2 weeks ago are not in print yet, but as soon as they're printed, we'll post them to our
Does it
website.
have any sign?
They have not, they don't have a wet signature on them yet. They've just been signed in theory.
Okay.
So.
Good.
Thank you. Appreciate that. If I might, you talked a lot about funding that we thankfully are going to receive. You did earmark a lot of it. Can't say I agreed with a lot of the things that you earmarked it for. I do have some alternate suggestions that focus more on the acute situations that we're facing right now. If I might just simply kind of go through them. Some of them are very simple, but some of them aren't. And they're not in any specific order. I do know the high school kids, students, if you will. This week's been a lot of chatter regarding the past school committee meeting to address budgetary shortness that they had to incur fees for, I believe, parking and, is it sporting events? Is it sporting?
No,
Or
it's
extracurricular activities?
Extracurricular events, the second extracurricular
So
activity.
I would request that all that extra money, you're trying to figure out what to do with it, maybe you could directly refund the students.
I wish we had extra money, but we really don't. And
Well, you
to-
just went over a budget.
Correct.
It's
but
a
we didn't go over
suggestion how you
budget.
spend that, yeah?
Yep, that money is been designated for certain functions with regard to pandemic relief, right? So as Erin said, there's $168,000 that has to go towards ventilation. All that money that is on there needs to be subject to reimbursement.
Infrastructure capital in regards to
It
COVID.
depends. Different money falls into different categories. So every dollar that we spend of all of the, and there's actually three ESSERs, one ARPA.
Three ESSERs, 2 ARPAs, and the Plymouth County
And the
CARES.
Plymouth County
funds.
CARES, and that Plymouth County CARES includes $100,000 from the state, correct?
Yes.
Those all have to be submitted for reimbursement. And when we submit those for reimbursement, they validate that, number one, it met the timing requirements, because some had to be finished by 12/31 of last year. And then the second thing they look at is it an appropriate use based upon the way the fund was designed. So if you go back and you look at some of the money we spent that has been reimbursed, and we just got the last reimbursement now that we submitted for 12/31 and all this other stuff, it was PPE, it was staffing.
It was staff for the remote model.
For the
It
remote model,
was
yeah, it was
cafeteria workers on
And
Mondays.
you
It
can't just
was.
say, oh, we're gonna do this.
That's, I'm sorry, I
Yeah.
thought, I understood the superintendent to say that we
No.
have funding they need to spend this one that expires first. They're prioritizing that money
Yeah, but we also have to
first.
spend it on certain categories.
Okay.
So, yeah, we can't, so
All right, thank you.
anytime we spend,
Maybe some of that-
so everybody understands, when we spend one-time money on an ongoing expense, it actually hurts us 2 times. It hurts us really for $2. So if you think we were given $100 for capital expenditures, and we use that for operational, what that means is that $100 eventually has to be spent to buy that capital item, and then we have to figure out where the $100 goes for operational. Which if you recall, I'm not sure if everybody picked up on it. Susie asked a question, Erin, when we talked about hiring the .5 social worker at the middle school and the behavioral specialist. The behavioral specialists are on contract, so they're not employees, they're not something we have to potentially have. The social worker is we're anticipating that eventually falling into the budget, and that was during last year's budget, talking about a this year priority anyway, so we were going to hire them. So we're not gonna make, it's not in the district's best interest for us to use any one-time money for ongoing expense. It's bad fiscal management, it just has such a ripple effect, and it actually can multiply if you let it go that way, so.
Maybe some of my other items might qualify. We just talked about shortages. Can you reserve a certain dollar amount for a potential shortage of teachers and having to replace them?
So replacing teachers,
Right, so we don't have a shortage of teachers right now, and so if
Right.
let's say a third grade teacher were to leave tomorrow, the budget to replace that teacher already exists. It's part of our base operating budget. So,
Perfect, okay.
you know, as Mike said, putting people on one-time money is not a great fiscal strategy, but, you know, if somebody in the district were to leave or choose not to come back for next year, their position is in the budget
Is in
already.
the bu-
It
yeah.
rolls forward.
in what ends, yeah, sure.
Fans for the elementary schools, every classroom, I would think that could qualify. I know that the high school gets air conditioned, which is quite luxurious.
It's not great air conditioning with 42
Well, you know, it's better than the elementary schools, right? I'm sure anyone who works in the elementary schools besides the library would greatly appreciate a big fan, like industrial fan. I mean, the kids, you know, the warm months around here can get quite hot. I'm glad, at least with the pandemic, that it encourages people opening windows. But I would imagine you'll all agree with me that it gets quite hot in the elementary schools. Can we buy fans for every teacher's room?
So there's two pieces to fans, right? You'll remember last year during the pandemic, teachers weren't allowed to use fans. So
Why?
because of the way that the particles blow, the positioning of the fan, they were not recommended for use in classrooms, especially our classrooms here at North or at Bryantville that have a univent system, which is like a closed one-room system. So I don't know that fans would meet the air quality components to the money. Second, plugging in a fan in every single room creates an operating expense that we don't currently have as far as
Are
electricity.
there solar
So-
run ones or something? Maybe?
sorry?
Maybe there's solar or environmental friendly, low energy, UEA approved. There must be some kind of industrial, low voltage running. That's definitely a concern as far as increasing the electrical utility bill for the school. It's a very valid concern, but we have some CARES money coming to us. And, I just learned right now, I think if I could just repeat that I understood you correctly, none of the elementary students last summer or spring or this fall have had a fan in any of their rooms. Is that correct?
So there are probably in the district maybe less than 20 rooms that have, at the elementary level, have an air conditioning in them. That is a function of a 504 plan, so an accommodation plan either for a specific student or for a staff member. But other than that, there were not fans.
Do
Up until May of
window
last
air
year.
conditions count as something that's not risky or threatening, like a fan is?
Apparently, because they have a filter built into them, it has, a level of air filtration associated
Could I
with
ask
it.
the
Again,
school
I'm not an
committee
expert on that, but.
to please look into, now that, our kids are sweltering, now that, I guess there are a good amount of days, right, that it's hot in this building. Am I not correct?
So we do, as part of our health and safety for students and staff when we talk about heat days as much as we talk about snow days. And so there's a heat index
Is your
that.
office air conditioned in this building?
I don't use I have an air conditioner in my office, but it is never on. I think people can attest to that. I don't ever use it because
I don't particularly care for myself.
I'm just of the mindset that I would not ask somebody to do something that I wouldn't do myself. So I'm not going to sit in my air-conditioned office while you have,
That
25
speaks to your
kids in front of you.
character. Thank you.
But,
Can we look at it at fans?
we can look at fans. I just, I'm not sure as, the person in charge of
Fresh air could help the students that are
academic achievement
tired.
for 2,600 kids that I would think fans would be on top of tutors. But again, I'm happy to look at it and cost it out and bring that information back. Absolutely.
Let's cost it out. Let's
Yep.
look at the pros and the cons.
Well, if you want to prioritize fans over tutors, I mean, I just heard that the money has to be specifically a capital investment
No, not
that's
capital.
tied to the
Certain
virus.
certain buckets have to be, was what I said, right? Certain allocations have to go, and then certain allocation has to go to capital. Other allocations have to fit within the categories that they deem, right? And again, one of them
And
had
one
to
of
be.
them's achievement gap.
One of them, yeah, there's all sorts of different.
I obviously would love all the money to go to academics.
Oh,
of
we
course,
would,
but
we would too, but, right, and.
It's hard to learn when you're sweating and it's dripping
I-
on your paper.
Yeah, as much as it was, we would have liked to have the 168,000 go to academics. It was also, for us, a positive that they said 168,000 has to go to air quality, because that helps us with the roof units at the high school, because at the pace we're going, we would never replace the 23 units, so.
But I'll cost it out and bring it back
Toss
to
it out,
you.
if we can figure out, yeah, any other logistics, I'll talk to you about that. Is that it?
Yeah, again, I just want to reiterate what this lady said regarding lockers. Can you please maybe survey the students that you're affecting? I feel as though your policy, if the students don't want their lockers, by all means, don't let them have lockers, but I think it's not, I just don't understand why they can't have lockers. There's that much of an academic advancement that's occurring because they don't have, that's hard for me to understand. In all the other school districts, I just.
That's what Donna's coming back. That's what-
Yeah, so, no,
it's
Don-
okay, it's
so-
okay. That's what Donna talked about the last, when she's,
Meeting,
I don't
so
even.
they were
was it
looking
the last
at
meeting?
having
Yeah,
lockers
so-
available
So
for
what I would
weekends.
say is, she knows the concerns, she's heard the concerns. Let her come back with what her recommendation is on how she thinks it should be changed or structured.
Thank you for your time. Thank you for your time.
Yep.
Some districts have lockers and some don't, right? I mean, it's not no, I mean, some districts are allowing students to use lockers and some are not. Right, and there's 50 that aren't, right? And so the determination from the building principal was to make a recommendation as a handbook change not to use lockers. It was shared with the committee voted for the handbook revision. I think, obviously, we understand the feedback and are willing to continue to talk about the issue.
So she'll come back, whether if we meet again this month, or if not, it'll be the first meeting in November.
If I might ask, I would like specifics as to the improvements that the teachers are citing. What specifically is improving? Because I'd like my child, they'd learn the responsibility, if anything, to be able to get to school 10 minutes early, fill her locker with all her stuff, get organized, and be prepared and sitting in her class, ready to learn. Not, and how is it kind of sanitized? What's the sanitary aspect of this? That all these children are bringing all their gear from all the different households, and they're lugging them through all the different classrooms. Did we look at it from that perspective?
So let's have.
I'm happy to have
yeah.
Donna include feedback from students and from staff when she comes back
Yeah.
to the committee.
Thank
I
you.
think that's.
Yep, absolutely. Okay. All right. Is it Pompeo or Pompeo? I want to do it the
She's
way
like,
you.
it's nine, whatever you want to
Trust
say.
me, with my.
Pompeo, but Pompeo sounds
Just to
fancy, and that's not.
Let's put it this way. You can see my last name. My kids say it wrong. That's okay. Don't worry about it.
Letters up there.
It's also a longer Italian name. My kids pronounce it wrong, so I'm good.
Married into it. Thank you all. thank you for everything that you guys do. My only question is, I do have a child who has difficulty wearing the masks, and we have a lot of kids in our neighborhood who are saying that teachers are, saying, pull up your mask, and they're constantly being told, pull up your mask with, threats of expulsion, yet the teacher isn't wearing their mask properly over the nose. So my question is, if we're going to discipline our students who are under 18, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, why aren't we going to are we disciplining staff? And I'm for 100%, I want to go back without masks, so. But if the teacher's going to tell a student, you need to put your mask up, and continues to do it, and says, well, you'll go to the principal's office if you don't listen to me, while their mask is underneath their nose, how is that setting a good example in their classroom?
So the same discipline process exists for staff that exists for students. It's a progressive discipline. It's a verbal warning, a written warning, suspension without pay, all of that. I can tell you that there are staff that have been disciplined for improper wearing of a mask. So
Okay. Just
more
because
staff than I've seen students. So.
All right, and I'm just curious, like, how a student who is in elementary school, how that we go about as parents, about their concerns. Well, I'm getting yelled at for not wearing my mask, but then we also don't want our student to be picked on because their mom emailed the principal and is like, you're yelling at my child and you're not wearing your mask properly. That's just a question. Huh?
So I will, again, remind staff what proper mask usage looks like for them, as well as our expectations for students. But I just want to remind anybody, if you're talking from the audience, the people at home can't hear you, so it looks kind of funky. It looks like we're like, you're not speaking and I'm not speaking and we're just sitting here. So I know that the committee's interested in what everyone has to say, so just, shoot up to the mic and say it in the mic so that there's a conversation.
And also, I can't hear you if you're way back there and you're talking softly, so.
No,
I heard what you said.
So that was just my concern.
Yep.
Like, a lot of the kids in our, we have like 30 kids in our neighborhood, and they're saying, well, we're getting spoken to, and the teacher's not wearing it right. But then as a parent, you don't want to be like, well, you're disciplining my child, yet you're not following the rules too, and it's supposed to be lead by example.
I agree.
That's all I wanted to know.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you.
This one's much easier. Mary Kate Fay.
I have 2 kids at Bryantville. I know, Erin, you talked a little bit about there was a need identified.
Oh, just,
the older-
yeah.
Get closer.
Either that or you can take it with you.
I've never had to use one of these in my entire life, but.
And it's so weird that it doesn't amplify in this space.
Yeah,
which
they didn't hear it
seems-
when it was this far in front of me, so
Okay, sorry. So I know you talked a little bit about, you identified a need in the middle school and high school for the kids. They were saying that they needed a mask break. I was wondering, what about at the elementary level? And on top of that, also, can a child ask for a mask break?
Yes. So the reason why I focus on the secondary level is there's fewer opportunities at the secondary level built into the schedule to take your mask off because they don't have recess, they don't have snack. So elementary students by design have a little bit more mask break built into their schedule, but the same exists for those students. They can identify that they need a mask break. In most instances, it looks like them standing outside the classroom. Obviously, there are students that are skilled at avoiding academic work. And so I think, teachers are attuned to that too, as well as, really trying to accommodate kids, because what many of you said and what we've heard, some teachers are struggling too. It's a long day presenting to a group of students with a mask on. So I think that our teachers are very understanding of where our students are at as far as that, but the opportunity for all students to self-identify and need an additional break is absolutely there.
Okay, so like what would be the protocol? So my thing is, my kids are afraid to ask for a mask break. They're afraid to take the mask off, not having anything to do with getting a virus. It's more so having to do with
compliance,
getting
right?
in
Yeah.
trouble. So, I've told them, ask your teacher if you need a mask break, but what is the protocol?
Right,
How
so
does the teacher approach it? Is this going on in school?
Right, so there's some students that have a detailed plan around additional mask breaks that are a part of a 504 and accommodation. That goes through either the guidance office or our nurses, but I'm happy to remind staff that some students need that and for them to open that conversation with kids. Like, hey guys, I know some of you may need more time. In my class, here's how you ask for it. Like, you raise your hand, or maybe they have a card or something on their desk. Some teachers approach it a little bit differently, but I'm happy to support staff in having that in their classroom. So I know it's happening because I can see it here at North when I'm rocking around at times, but wanting to make sure that it's universal so I can, give staff some ideas on how to approach it in their classroom, but make sure that everyone's having the conversation with kids, that you have the opportunity to take a break if you need it.
Okay. And then, just like these past few days where it's been rainy, what is being done right now for like indoor recess? If a mask break is taken away, how are we fitting that back in?
So they have spaces in all of the buildings where students can be 6 feet apart for the mask break. My office is right next to kindergarten, so I know what indoor recess looks like for them, and they're in the hallway at 6 feet apart. It feels like all day, but I think it might only be 25 minutes. So it is built into the day that they're still able to remove their masks even when the weather is bad outside. The spaces have been identified in the buildings for students to do so safely at 6 feet apart.
And I just had one other question about the MIIS. So say a family opted out of the MIIS. Were you saying that the attestation can replace that?
So right now, we don't have accurate information from MIAS you could see from those percentages. So the attestation is the first step for us to get an idea of how many families have students that are vaccinated. We don't have, the municipal numbers tell us that we have a huge portion of students, but we don't have the data for that. So the attestation is the first level of data for that. The expectation would be that if we receive attestations from 185 families, but when the MIIS database is up and running, there's only 180 families in a particular grade, that the nurse would reach out and connect with those families just to confirm that you do have the option to opt out. That's absolutely, as a parent and as an individual, you have the option to opt out of the state system. So the nurse would call just to confirm that the student had been vaccinated. So does that look like a vaccine card? No, I think it's just a phone call.
Okay.
Just to make sure.
All right. Thank you.
Pembroke, I'm going to be real quick. I just want to say that just as of recently, my high schooler's been coming home a little bit stressed and a little kind of aggravated just with, he said there's a lot more over the intercom, wear your mask, people in the hall. It's more constant, and it's kind of, I guess, stressing them out a little bit. So I think they're all feeling that. So I just wanted to point that out. I don't know why. I don't know whether it's at all the schools or just the high school, but he pointed that out. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention.
Still smart.
And when you go back to Mr. Riley there to follow up on his response, could you suggest to him that maybe we replace the desks with some restaurant tables so they don't have to wear the masks? Thank you.
Great. Okay, anything else? All right. Thank you for all that. Believe me, if we could get that creative and make it the North Pembroke Cafe, we would.
It's so hard, right?
Hi.
May I ask a question, please, regarding medical exemptions?
Sure.
And teachers' awareness of them, and how is the communication being made? I would think a teacher would want to implement the mask mandate with all their students, is my understanding, right? They have to make sure everyone's masks up in their class. How would they know if a student in their class had an exemption?
So when you submit an exemption to our nurses, part of the process is for you to identify whether or not you'd like us to share that information with staff. And if you say yes, then staff is made aware of the fact that Mary Beth does not need, the staff that interact with Mary Beth know that Mary Beth does not need to wear a mask. We do not tell all of the staff about it, which is, I think, a means to control some of the information. If If you don't want the information shared with teachers, then the administration tells the staff that please be advised that any student not wearing a mask has received a mask exemption. And so that the nurse is the keeper of that information, so.
So, if I'm a teacher and I'm in class, and a student is sitting in my class, and the parent opted not to share the HIPAA information with the teacher, but the nurse knows, and the student, so the parent didn't share the information, and the student sitting in class without a mask on, how is the teacher to deal with that? How do
So
they?
What we've said to staff is if there is a student in your classroom that is unmasked, they have a mask exemption.
So I would imagine, I just heard a lot of feedback that there's a lot of communication over the loudspeaker as well as in the classroom, reminding students to lift their mask. What if the person who doesn't lift the mask has an exemption but doesn't feel comfortable sharing that with the teacher in this, as a minor dealing with that situation? How would the school committee, what's in place for that situation, please?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
The question is, you told me that or not me, but the parent either can share with the nurse, or the nurse can share with the teacher, or the nurse cannot share with the teacher.
Right.
So you're asking if a student isn't wearing their mask properly but has a mask exemption, what happens?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so let me go through
How does the
that.
teacher not discriminate?
So the teacher would say that the child who's not wearing the mask, whatever, not wearing the mask properly, they would then send them to.
So discipline referrals, for lack of a better word, go to the office. So,
So the child has a medical exemption, they get a discipline referral, they get sent to the office.
It's not like a documented discipline referral, because we've told teachers, we don't need you to be the mask police. If there's something going on in your classroom, elicit the help of an administrator.
So they would eventually get to the office then would, I'm assuming, follow up with the nurse to see if there's an exemption. At some point, either the parent or the child needs to at least say to the administrator or to the
nurse can share with the administrator. So the building administrators know who in the building has mask exemptions.
Well, even before that, you just shared that the understanding is if they're not wearing a mask, they have an exemption.
Correct. And I think what she's saying is if they're wearing it below their nose.
If they're wearing it but not wearing it properly.
They're still wearing the mask, but just not wearing it properly, because I get it, kids don't want to look different.
No, what if they're not wearing, but if they're not wearing the mask, and the teacher says.
They're treated with the exemption from what I hear.
They're treated as if they have an exemption.
But
we have told all staff,
that doesn't sound like that's
there is a student in your
happening.
room without a mask, you are to assume that they have a mask exemption.
They don't know it specifically because some have chosen not to specifically indicate
So
it.
tomorrow, a child sits down at their desk, and they don't have a mask on.
Yeah.
And the teacher says, "Where's your mask?" And the child doesn't respond because they know they don't have to wear a mask. What happens next?
I think we just went
The
over that.
same
The
thing.
teacher knows, so the teacher's not going to say anything to the child, right? But I just heard people
Right, so the
say-
student, let's say they'd be sent to the office, the student would be sent back to the class, and they would
So that would
still-
happen once. The child
they
would be
still
embarrassed
unmasked,
once
which
and have to
means-
go to the office. And then the administrative would do a circle and come full circle again with their communication. And then it would be identified that we're not gonna address that issue again.
So unless the student's removed from the building, you can assume that that student is meeting the requirements for school readiness. And if that means they have a mask exemption, then they don't need a mask.
So a teacher is able to identify if a person has a medical exemption because the second time they enter the classroom unmasked, they'll know administration didn't deal with this child,
I'm
so
not saying
therefore
that.
there's an exemption?
You have put out
Yeah, is this- can I
87
just-
what-ifs.
Yeah, can I just, is this,
Okay.
can you,
Okay.
If there's
Thank you.
context, I'm happy to
Yeah,
answer it.
'cause
If
I'm-
there's
I'm-
something specific with your student, I'm happy to answer it. I'm happy to work with the
Yeah,
school
'cause it
nurse
just
to
keeps-
get you.
I just don't understand how medical exemptions are anonymous and no one knows about them. So how do you enforce the mask thing? Like, I don't get it.
Parents with medical exemptions, I would think, would want the students' teachers to know what was going on with that student. So it's quite rare that a family would say, you know what, I don't want you to clue the teacher into what's going on with my kid. I'm not saying that it doesn't happen, but we do have some families that don't want that specific information shared with the teacher. What I've explained to you is if that happens, the office and the nurse are aware of students that have mask exemptions. If I send Susie back to your class without a mask, continue
By
on.
default, the teacher's kind of good at.
Okay.
Yep, continue on.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, all right. Did you have a question? Did you? Yeah, just,
Hi, Lynn McGee. I just had a couple questions. The attestations that the students are supposed, or the families are supposed to submit, what happens with those once they're collected by the school?
So it's electronic submission. It stays with our student record. Like, I mean, it doesn't become a part of your medical file or anything like that. It's,
So it doesn't go to the state, like if?
no, it doesn't get reported to the state, no.
Okay, so how do you prove to the state that you've reached the 80%?
I, as a superintendent, sign an attestation that says this building has reached 80%. And I'm signing that saying that I've collected attestation from students, staff, used the MIS database, or asked for proof of vaccination through a vaccine
Were
card.
those your choices that they gave you?
Those are the
or-
choices that they gave us.
Okay. The other thing is that, I mean, with those out-of-state, I can't, I've never said that word
I have
before.
to say it 10 times in my head first.
If people attest to have been vaccinated, then obviously, say we reach the 80%, then we sort of open a whole new can of worms with who's masked, who's not masked.
Right, what we talked about is when we get close to that number, and I suggested 75%, that the committee have a conversation about what those expectations are. Because I'm not mask police, I don't want the teachers to be mask police, I don't think it's even realistic for DESE to think that somebody has a clipboard of, here's the 41 kids here that need to wear a mask. So we need to be, this body needs to be very clear of the day that the waiver is granted and the mandate is removed from, I mean, realistically, the high school's probably the only building in the near future that could get there, what that looks like for students and what that looks like for staff. I want to make
Okay.
sure everybody understands the expectations.
I thought you had mentioned at the last meeting, maybe I misunderstood, that the high school and the middle school had to be combined?
No,
for
so
their
the way the
percentages?
municipal data works, it comes at 12 to 15 years old and 16 to 19. And because the high school, the population is 14 to 18, it spans both those bands of vaccination rates. But we are now, with the attestation, collecting it by grade.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
There was a change in what they asked for, or how there was a change in how they implemented what they originally said they were going to do.
Okay, but the mask rule doesn't change, it's changed based on the whole school, not on like the ninth grade pass.
No,
so
it
they
has
don't
to
have
be
wear-
the 80% of the population in the building.
Okay.
Yes, school-based.
I think that was it. But, I had a question about the MCAS, but it's not important. No,
The MCAS is the most
Yeah.
It is important.
Yeah. No, it was just, I was just curious whether, so the original MCAS was created by the state, then they switched to the park, which is like a national profit-driven test, and now they're back to MCAS, but
2.0, MCAS
2.0, is that really the park test because it's still not created back in the hands of the state? Or is, I didn't know, is it in the hands of the state? Are there
Right,
people
so
creating tests here?
The MCAS aligns
or-
with the Massachusetts state frameworks. So it's in the hands of Massachusetts. The test is developed based off of the frameworks in Massachusetts. It's not a national framework.
Okay, so it's not, but it's still based off the Common Core.
There are some elements of Common Core in it, but the Massachusetts frameworks are like this big, and then the Common Core is like this big. So the Massachusetts test is actually considered one of the better tests in the nation in terms of the breadth and the depth of the material that it covers. And
Okay.
it is designed by Massachusetts teachers. There are actually like test selection committees and teachers who are actually at the grade level who work and look at the questions and the test and make sure that it is appropriate for the student.
Okay, good, because for some reason I was under the impression that the park, that the MCAS 2.0 was sort of just like the park and was not under control
There are
of the state.
elements that are similar because there are just certain standards for what grade 3 looks like, right?
Right.
In maybe the world. So there are going to always be some overlap and some similarities. But three of our content supervisors sit on those boards, Dr. Galligan, Mark Duffy, and Jonathan Shapiro. They all sit on MCAS review boards, either in terms of designing tests, testing questions, or looking at the structural tests. We're very fortunate to have that level of expertise.
Okay, great, thank you.
We even had a Common Core question in like 7 or 8 years, so.
That was fun.
Thank you, okay. All right, so here's where we kind of are. If we're going to take action, we need to take 1 or 2 actions depending on how you want to. One is to collect data from families when we get to a certain percentage, and the second is collect data from staff when students get to a certain percentage. So is there, I'm not putting the percentage on, the recommendation on the student percentage?
70%.
So if we got to 70% of.
I would look at collecting staff data at that point.
So what do we want to, okay, so staff at 70%, but when you look at the rates, we don't want to start collecting in school until we get to a certain threshold. First of all, have any questions?
I don't know, no, nothing's come in. I don't know that we need to do any initial collecting after the attestation. So
But
you
we
all
don't
are
even
approving the
rephrase it.
attestation.
Yeah, are we going to, do you want us to start collecting attestations?
Yes,
Got it. Okay.
like tomorrow, so that we can have an idea what the number is.
Got it, okay. So the motion would be to collect attestations from families and then collect attestations from staff when the students get to 70%.
Correct.
That is what the recommendation is.
Guess that's our motion.
Yeah, so the motion would be to
Yep.
follow the administrative recommendation for collecting of vaccination data. That's what the motion would be.
All right. I'll make the motion.
Okay, so motion by David. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Lance. Is there discussion or additional discussion? Sure. Hold on, say that again, because I think you got it, I heard it, I might have heard it backwards.
You just have to come up to the microphone.
Yeah, yeah,
so
oh,
they can
yeah,
hear you at home.
sorry. Yeah, so come up and ask your question so they can hear you at home.
Because the form is, you're collecting is you're seeing how many are vaccinated, right? And that would mean that if the vaccinated, the population that's vaccinated could not wear a mask. Or the ones that were not vaccinated would. But we're
Correct.
just going to keep the number of cases.
Oh, we're still going to keep the
dash.
we're still going to keep the dashboard, you see.
Pushing that, you have to.
Absolutely. So, yeah, I guess two comments around that. Number one, the data that's published to the website on active cases, whatever, that
Yep,
is
that'll
going
keep
to,
going.
that's going to stay, no doubt about it. No doubt about it, because that is,
So there is a question that came into the box too. I just want to be clear. Once students remove masks, that changes what close contact tracing looks like. So just
Right,
as.
which is fine. I
Right.
just don't want to have the mask, unmasked.
Yep.
Yeah.
Vaccinated, unvaccinated.
Yeah.
Yes,
Well, and I can't speak,
concerns me.
I can't speak for everyone, but I think I'm viewing this as another way to continue to move the process forward as we continue to look at the other factors that are involved, right? So this allows us to move this forward to potentially get the students without masks while we're still looking at all the data that's coming us through this whole process. And we know there's some big hurdles still left. There's going to be a challenge with those masks and those unmasked. We've talked about mental health of our students, right? So
Yeah, I don't think it's masked and unmasked.
Well,
I think it comes
right,
down
but
to
again.
vaccinated and not
Fine,
vaccinated, and then people
Right,
starting to conflict
there's
people
so
that
many
are
variables in this,
vaccinated,
correct.
and it gets a little hairy there.
Sure,
That's
yeah.
what I'm concerned about.
Which-
I don't want to see that.
Sure.
You guys stuck with the data. I want to see it just continue.
No, and I think we will continue to follow
Right.
things.
Absolutely, yeah. And we're aware, and I think that, well, I know it's part of the plan. We have to write this, like, how many steps we have to follow. That's, one of them is, what do we do within the schools for, I mean, because the question got asked earlier, You know, we're not having people walking on with clipboards, at least that's not my intention, I don't think it's anybody else's. But then what happens if somebody turns to somebody else, oh, you're wearing a mask, you're one of those, right? I'm just making that up, but I have, but let's put it this way, I have kids. Yeah, I have kids, I deal with kids a lot, I coach, right? So we get it, and we'll look at that. We have to get to step 1 before we can get to 2, 3, 4. Yeah, so you're absolutely right.
The actual data cases were included.
Absolutely, and just to let, so yeah, because there was also another question over the past few days about whether that data is accurate. That data is 100% accurate. It gets updated as soon as we have the information. It gets verified and validated frequently.
Right. So the data on the dashboard is more accurate than if you've signed up for the daily email from the town, because we get notification from a family instantly when their child tests positive. That could take 2 or 3 days for it to hit the Maven database. So currently, right now, there are 13 active student cases. 10 of them are at Hobbamock, 3 of them are at North. I can tell you that within both of those numbers, there are some families, so it's multiple children, which happens. But the question in the mailbox was just around, because there's 10 at Hobbamock, and up until today, there was only 10 at Hobbamock and no cases anywhere else, is it school-based spread? And so there is some different grade spans happening there. There are 2 cases in the 6th grade that both Nancy Funder, the Public Health North, and Lisa are working with the families to trace. The tracing is still happening, but at this point, it has not been determined that there's school-based spread.
The spread that we've had has been outside of the school.
Right, and just my last pitch for families, if your child has any symptoms, keep your kid home. It goes back to the onset of symptoms when we're talking about contact tracing for the 48 hours prior to. So we're getting a lot of, my son tested positive on Sunday. You know, now that I think about it, he had a sore throat and a headache on Friday. So now you've created contacts for Friday. So I know it's hard with kids because it's allergy season, it's the change of seasons. There's so many other things. But if your student has symptoms, please, take the precaution to keep them home if you can.
And you can get, I've seen the updates. We were on the updates because we all had it too, so
Yep.
I watched it go up.
Yep.
So, absolutely, but I just wanted to be sure.
Yep.
That is still being in play.
Well,
Right.
absolutely.
And then-
I'm uncomfortable with unvaccinated, vaccinated.
The last piece of the question in the mailbox asks if a vaccinated student is considered a close contact. So all close contacts are notified. Right now, we don't know if students are vaccinated or not vaccinated, but as a vaccinated close contact, you don't need to participate in the test and stay or quarantine, but you still need to self-monitor for 14 days for symptoms. So absolutely, at the secondary level, obviously there's not many instances of vaccinated students at the elementary level, but secondary students that are identified as close contacts, even if they're vaccinated, there are still protocols that you're supposed to be following.
Real quick second. Is your question?
I was wondering what the category of natural immunity, is that a category on the attestation sheet is the attestation sheet to say I vaccinated or
No, it doesn't have a
unvaccinated,
place
right?
for you to check off that you've had COVID within the past 90 days. It doesn't have that. The state is only tracking vaccination rates, not recovered
And is the
cases.
vaccination rate, I know that the vaccination is only, I think there's talk, I don't know, if it's not, it might not be effective. It might expire, the effectiveness may expire. Is that also being worked through as well?
So the attestation is asking for the date and the type of your first and second dose. Obviously, if you have the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, it's just your first dose. But I can only assume that that information is helpful if a booster happens to come out, that we could notify folks if,
And if they don't get the booster, will they be tracking to move them back into the unvaccinated
what ifs that we
category?
don't know.
We don't know.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So going back to the motion from David, second by Lance, to collect student data from families on vaccination and collect data from staff when students get to 70% at a particular school, which is the administrative recommendation. Further discussion or questions? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? That is unanimous. Okay, it's the first step. Couple things before we go to the surplus things. I want to give everybody a quick update. Back at the beginning of the summer, or whatever it was, had a conversation with Representative Cutler, and we agreed that, I asked if we could meet periodically just to touch base. We recommended, including Senator Moran and whoever at the time was the chairman of the board, the select board. So yesterday morning, I had coffee at Panera with Representative Cutler, Senator Moran, and select board member Rushing, or Jessica Rushing, who won't be as formal here. And just, I gave them a list of the things. They gave some feedback on what's going on, but I gave them a list of items that we're looking for. I talked to Aaron about this when we had the fiscal strategy meeting last week. Let me give you an idea of what we requested and a couple other pieces of feedback that I have. First, I asked them, this was kind of my ask, I'll take blame for this, but the one thing we've been putting on a letter for at least 5 years, to include vocational education transportation as part of the regional transportation reimbursement. They felt stronger about this, I think, than in the past. They got it, and they got the ask and the why. Hopefully that can move forward because it impacts everybody, and especially with a lot of money being dedicated. Voc Ed schools are going to get a huge infusion of money this year because of the emphasis on vocational education. We actually had some conversations about what does that mean for us and how can we do things, and I have 2 updates from Mary Beth of considerations. Second, we asked them to confirm if circuit breaker funding is still at 72%. As you may remember, we're going to take the first quarter payment and use it in this year's budget, which is
A portion of the first quarter
portion.
payment.
So we need to make sure that 72% stays.
They actually came out today at 75% for the first quarter payment.
So that's even better. They don't have to answer that question. Let's see if I get an answer. We also asked if they could hold us harmless, or hold districts harmless, on the October 1st enrollments. For those of you who aren't aware, our state funding, our Chapter 70 funding, is based on the number of students you have enrolled on October 1st. What we've asked them to do is roll back to 2019, which is what they did last year. The reason we asked that is there's so many students in flux. Homeschooling is up dramatically for multiple different reasons, and the comment I made to them is that student who's homeschooled, we're expecting to get back next school year, and if you don't include them in the funding number, then we're going to end up not getting funding for a student we're expecting. They liked it, and they seemed in favor, and they'll find out about that. We also asked for something. The Student Opportunity Act is, I guess, Ed Reform 2.0 or 3.0, a portion of it, right? When they reaffirmed education reform, when they had to, I think it was 2018?
Right, so it's from the Every Student Succeeds Act, ESSA.
So they call it Student Opportunity Act, SOA. We have to certify the number of low-income students in the district. We asked them to delay that certification for a year. It doesn't impact anything, it just certifies, right, and it goes into the funding formula. We asked them to delay it because of the effort to capture that data and file it when you think of all of the additional things, something we just talked about. There's additional stresses put on our administration. We run, and we talked about budget earlier, and I made this comment just so everybody's aware, we're nearly 75% salaries, and when you include busing, special education, or transportation, special education, utilities, you start to get to that 90% range of where our budget is. We're low on administration by design, so we can protect the classroom. That said, we need to remove some of the pressures they have so that they can do the other jobs, just as Mary Beth and Erin presented earlier. So that's pretty important to us. It might not sound like a lot, but it is a significant amount of work for them to certify that.
Right, so obviously we have a certification for low-income students. A lot of that comes through direct certification from the state. This year, what they're asking is for folks to go out and solicit additional information for families that didn't necessarily meet the direct certification. You know, in hindsight, if we had known that that was going to be the request, we would have included that as part of our registration documents. It's really hard after the fact to get people to go back into the portal and do it again. So that was the reasoning for the request.
Yeah, so we'll get feedback. I sent that to them last night after meeting yesterday. We'll follow up in a couple of months. We'll meet again in a couple of months. I'll follow up if I don't hear anything at some point in the next few weeks. 3 other things to note. They mentioned we should find out what's in the infrastructure bill. I did reach out to a senior congressional staff member who happens to be a relative, and he let me know there's at least $20 billion in the bipartisan bill, so it's in the first 1.5, depending upon what infrastructure is considered by the end of the week. Some of it is new to me. on what is infrastructure and what isn't, but that's my own opinion. But there's about $20 billion that is in there for school infrastructure or related to schools. So there could be some more money coming in the next year or so. Two other things, Mary Beth, you know how we talked about this at the meeting, and you and I have talked about this, engaging with local businesses. Senator Moran had two things. One thing she mentioned, they have this in Falmouth, where she's from, and she was a former select board member. She said they have a benefactor, but she also recommended potentially with the local businesses, if they have equipment that could fit into what we're trying to do, potential donations. So when we meet with the chamber, or when you meet with the chamber, we may want to see if any of those businesses want to loan or donate equipment that they don't use. That obviously, we're not going to take power saws, but if they have something that is safe that we could use to help the students. The other thing she mentioned was Bridgewater State, former Senator DiMosito is on the staff there, and one of the things he's working on is a data security program that they're doing some work with schools. She had some of the details, but not all of it. I'm wondering if we could reach out to his office. If you can, I'm happy to call him from having worked with him before. He's really, really good. So that's what I have. Some of that tied to budget. I should have mentioned it earlier. I apologize. My fault. Any questions?
No, thanks for doing that. That's awesome.
Thank you.
Just another thing I was able to do during my day. Yes.
Sounds like you made progress.
We're trying.
Some good conversation.
We're trying. Okay. So we do have two other things to consider here. The first is approval of surplus textbooks for the high school. You have two documents in front of you. One is from Dr. Galligan in Humanities on Government in America, and the other is a series of textbooks from the science department by 1982 chemistry book, 92 chemistry books, 98 as you can see the years. So is there a motion to deem surplus the textbooks as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Susie, second by David. Further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstained, that is unanimous. The last thing here is a waiver. So it's a waiver for the MIA for girls ice hockey and boys swimming. Just for Sue's benefit, I think Lance, because it happened before you, we did request a girls ice hockey waiver last year. What this does is it allows us to take, in this case, girls for hockey and boys from swimming from middle school and allow them to participate in a sub-varsity or varsity sport. We need a waiver, and obviously it's going to be driven by the size of team enrollment, also student safety. So.
Right, so just to clarify, girls ice hockey, we only have a varsity team here in Pembroke since we split from the co-op team 5 or 6 years ago at this point. Each of those years we have requested a waiver for 8th graders to play on the team. I think last year we had 3. That's pretty much, it hovers around 3. Swimming is a little bit different. This is the first time we're asking for a waiver. It's for boys swimming in particular. Right now there's only 7 boy swimmers, and it would be very difficult for them to have a meet with that number of students. In an effort of full transparency, there was a request also for a waiver for to allow 8th graders to play for freshman girls basketball. I'm not moving that request forward, as that doesn't fit with the philosophy on how we've approached this. Our philosophy has been in an effort to field the JV and a varsity team. There are several sports over the years that experience dips, ebbs and flows in their enrollment where we don't necessarily have a freshman team that year. I know that Pembroke Youth Basketball is a healthy program here in town. I don't anticipate a forever shortage of students. There seems to be I think it's from two years ago. So the current junior class, there's very few of them on the team. So I think they're, trying to shuffle around. But I don't feel as though that meets with it. And I luckily have the first signature on the waiver, and I say no.
Thank you. Discussion, questions?
That was just going to be mine. Do we anticipate, because I know we did softball as well last year.
Right.
Do we anticipate any others that might?
I don't even know if we'll need softball this year. I think when the program does well, it tends to attract interest, and the girls have had some good seasons, and we have an excellent coach in Coach DiPolito. So other than that, that's all that's on the horizon. We try to do them a season at a time. But.
So why would they ask, just curious, why was the girls basketball asking for the waiver?
So we have had a girls basketball team here for a long time. a freshman girls basketball, we've had a girls basketball team forever, for 17 years now. A freshman girls team here for a while. I think a couple years ago, there was 7 students on the team, which is a difficult number, so if somebody's sick or if somebody can't make it, we're already, 5 is the number that you needed. I think we have a very dynamic coach for the girls basketball team, and I think he was, worried about the feeder, and if there wasn't a good, solid group on that freshman team, what would JV look like, what would varsity look like? But I do think we have really healthy Pembroke youth basketball numbers.
So there's enough kids on each team to keep the team.
Well, there's enough kids to have a JV and a varsity team. The interest was just, if we could field some 8th graders, we could, have a couple of kids, a couple of freshmen play on the freshman teams, shift, swing to varsity.
Okay,
kind of
got
move
it.
around a little bit.
How does that affect their eligibility? You're limited to playing 4 years of varsity during your high school career. So if you're an 8th grader and you've been brought up during a waiver, the 8th graders, they've got to be pretty exceptional to get to varsity in 8th grade, but that.
We had a hockey player, one of the hockey players, well, actually, all 3 of them, but one of them was Patriot Ledger All-Star.
But it's been a long time since I played, but I know we were limited to, you earned 4 varsity letters for a sport, and then that was it. Your
When it's a waiver
eligibility is over.
situation,
You
it
can
doesn't
play.
require
require-
a 5th-year waiver.
Okay.
The 5th-year waiver is to prevent reclassifications of high school students. So they're looking, the reason why a waiver would be a student who starts at one school as a freshman and a sophomore, leaves, reclasses as a sophomore, and then does 2 sophomore years, a junior and senior. Those require the MIA waivers, yeah, which they did not, they granted, I think, my understanding is they only granted 1 last year. And they're getting much more strict on those rules. And there have been rule changes proposed on all this stuff.
Well, that's why I'm
They're getting
asking,
very-
is you
they're
don't want to
getting-
know how long it's been since I've played on a sport.
Yeah, they're getting, I think, yeah, and I don't want to read too much into it, even though I was on an MIA meeting this afternoon too, but they're getting very, it's a different vibe that I get out of it than what I used to do. It's all positive. I think they're doing a lot for student athletes, but it's.
I just don't want any waivers to work against the student in their
we
eligibility.
wouldn't.
That's
No,
really
when
what
we
your
apply
purpose
for the
is.
waiver as a district, it's not,
Okay.
doesn't fall into
Thank
the
you.
5 years.
Okay, so is there a motion to approve the waiver request for girls ice hockey and boys swimming?
So moved.
Motion by Sue, second by
Second.
Lance.
We're trying not to do a double Susie. It's
Thank
sort
you.
of like, a
Going easy
backflip
on
and
Natalie.
a hip twist. We
For
just can't do
Natalie,
it.
she just has to type it, I have to say it. Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstained, that's unanimous, okay. As far as meeting goes, we're trying to figure out if we need one before town meeting, that would be the next meeting date. If we don't, most likely we would meet on the first Tuesday in November, which I think is the 2nd. So we would get back to our first and third. It's all gonna depend on what happens between now and
And that's
next
election day.
Wednesday
is
or
it-
Thursday. There's
is
no
that-
election day.
There's
There's no
no,
national election.
There's no state election.
No state.
I'm just
It's
looking
a-
at my.
Just
City of
Boston
Boston.
Mayoral.
Boston mayoral, yeah, see,
Okay, so we're good then, because I just want to make sure we're not interfering with anything.
There's a question in the mailbox
Sure.
just on why we wouldn't sign the waiver for 8th grade girls to play on the freshman team, because that level of competition outweighs what they're faced with in Pembroke youth basketball. And I think that's a philosophy conversation, right? We didn't have a freshman field hockey team this year. There isn't even a feeder for field hockey. I think the committee in the past has looked at, fielding a JV and a varsity team being a sign of a healthy program, and that the freshmen.
we've never had a waiver to run a freshman
No.
team. We've always had a waiver to run a.
JV
mostly-
or a
Yeah, I
varsity.
mean, most likely,
It's most likely.
most likely it's varsity. A couple times it's been JV. Softball was JV last year to get numbers up, even though some of those girls played varsity, but it was to make sure we had those. Generally, because there's an option for the freshmen to play JV, that's why we wouldn't, or varsity.
I'd be concerned if there was no JVs. But
Right, no, there's enough kids for a JV and a
But
varsity.
here's the thing, if they get to the numbers and it looked like if they could, when you bring the freshmen into JV and varsity, right, so it's, when you look at the 4 grades into the 2 teams,
Mhm.
if it looked at the potential of huge rosters for cuts, I think then
Right,
then we would reevaluate.
Right, but that's not where we're at right now.
Yeah. Okay, so with that, if there's nothing else. Take a motion to adjourn to go into executive session, pursuant to Chapter 38, Section 21A3, to discuss a personal services contract as an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the legal position of the school committee as declared by the chair, after which no further business will be conducted.
So moved.
Seconded.
Motion by David, second by Susie. Sue?
Yes.
Yes.
Susie? Lance? David?
Yes.
Thanks, everybody, and we will see you either in a couple weeks or a few weeks. Okay, thank you.
Do you guys want to go